Blood dripped from Maylin's split lip onto the dust-choked street, each crimson drop a testament to Victor Kane's brutality. She swayed, but didn't fall, wouldn't fall. Not for him, not for this god-forsaken town that had watched her suffer for 3 years without lifting a finger. Across the street, a stranger's hand moved toward his gun. This is the story of a woman who refused to break, and the drifter who couldn't look away. Stay with me until the end. Hit that like button and comment what city you're watching from, so I can see how far this story travels. The town of Redemption Springs didn't deserve its name. It sat like a festering wound in the California desert, a collection of weathered buildings and broken dreams held together by dust and the iron grip of one man. Victor Kane. His ranch sprawled across the valley like a diseased empire, and what Victor wanted, Victor took. The law turned blind eyes. The sheriff collected his paycheck and asked no questions. And the people, the good God-fearing people of Redemption Springs, they looked away too. Maylin had learned that lesson the hard way. She stood now in the middle of Front Street, her left eye swelling shut, blood running from a gash above her eyebrow. Her traditional blouse was torn at the shoulder, revealing purple bruises blooming like poisonous flowers across her skin. 3 of Victor's men circled her like wolves. Chet Morrison, all muscle and meanness. Dutch Keller, who smiled when he hurt people. And Billy Wade, young and eager to prove himself the worst of them all. "You should have taken the money, China girl," Chet said, spitting tobacco juice that landed inches from her feet. "Mr. Kane was being generous. $50 for that patch of dirt? That's more than it's worth, more than you're worth." Maylin's fingers curled into fists at her sides. She tasted copper and fury. "That land belonged to my husband. He died working it. You don't get to—" Dutch's fist caught her in the stomach, driving the air from her lungs. She doubled over, gasping, but forced herself upright again. Her legs shook. Everything shook. But she met Dutch's eyes with something that made him take a half step back. "Spirited little thing," Billy laughed, but it sounded nervous. "Mr. Kane's gonna have fun breaking you proper." "Mr. Kane can go to hell," Maylin said through gritted teeth. "And you can tell him I said so." That was when Chet hit her, a vicious backhand that snapped her head sideways and sent her sprawling into the dirt. The metallic taste of blood filled her mouth. Through the ringing in her ears, she heard boots approaching. Somewhere nearby, a horse whinnied. A door slammed. Life in Redemption Springs continued, indifferent to one woman's suffering. She'd been in this country for 6 years. 6 years since she'd left Guangdong Province with Thomas Lin, the American missionary who'd promised her a better life. He'd been kind, Thomas. Earnest. He'd meant what he said about equality and opportunity. He just hadn't lived long enough to protect her from the reality. Cholera had taken him 18 months after they'd arrived, leaving her with 40 acres of stubborn earth, a 2-room cabin, and the slowly dawning horror that to most people in Redemption Springs, she was less than human. The Chinese Exclusion Act had passed 2 years before she arrived, and while her marriage gave her technical legal standing, laws meant nothing when nobody cared to enforce them. "Get up," Chet ordered. "We ain't done with you yet." Maylin pushed herself to her hands and knees. Spit blood. The street was empty of help but full of watching eyes. She could feel them behind curtains, through cracked doors. Mrs. Henderson at the general store. Old Pete from the livery. Even Pastor Matthews, whose Sunday sermons overflowed with words like mercy and compassion. None of them moved. She'd stopped expecting them to. Stopped hoping. Hope was a luxury she'd abandoned after the first year, when she'd asked the sheriff to investigate who'd poisoned her well, and he'd laughed in her face. When she'd tried to sell vegetables in town and found her cart overturned, her produce trampled. When she'd walked past groups of men who said things that made her skin crawl, and women who clutched their children close as if she carried disease. Thomas had told her America was different. He'd been wrong about that too. "I said get up." Chet grabbed a fistful of her hair and yanked her upright. Pain exploded across her scalp. She bit down on a scream, refusing to give him the satisfaction. "Leave her be." The voice came from across the street, quiet, almost conversational, but it cut through the afternoon heat like a knife. Every head turned. The man stood in the shadow of the old trading post, one shoulder leaning against a support post. He wasn't particularly tall, maybe 5'10", with the lean build of someone who'd spent years in the saddle. His clothes were trail-worn, brown duster over a faded shirt, denims that had seen better days, boots that had walked 1,000 miles. A hat pulled low shadowed his face, but Mei Lin could make out a strong jaw, a few days of stubble, and eyes that held something she recognized: weariness. The kind that went bone deep. Chet didn't release his grip on her hair. "This ain't your concern, stranger. Keep walking." "Can't do that," the man said. He straightened and his hand moved, casual, unhurried, to rest on the grip of the revolver at his hip. "See? I was trying to enjoy a drink and watch the sunset. You're spoiling both." Dutch laughed. "You're going to get yourself killed over a China girl and a drink? Maybe." The stranger's tone didn't change. "Maybe you're going to let her go and walk away. That seems easier." Billy Wade puffed up, trying to match the other's bravado. "You know who we work for. Victor Kane owns this town. You're making a real big mistake." "Wouldn't be my first." The man's eyes flicked to Mei Lin, and something passed between them, an understanding maybe, or just recognition of two people who'd both been beaten down by life and were tired of it. "Let her go." Chet's grip tightened for a moment, making Mei Lin wince. Then he shoved her away with enough force to send her stumbling. She caught herself against a hitching post, her breath coming in ragged gasps. "Fine," Chet said, "but you just bought yourself a world of hurt, friend. Mr. Kane don't forget, and he sure as hell don't forgive." "I'll lose sleep over it." The stranger's hand stayed on his gun. "Now get." For a moment, Mei Lin thought they might draw. The tension pulled taut as a piano wire. Dutch's hand twitched toward his holster. Billy licked his lips nervously. Chet's face went purple with rage. But they didn't draw. Maybe it was something in the stranger's eyes, that flat calm that said he'd done this before and wouldn't hesitate. Maybe they were just cowards at heart, brave only when the odds were stacked. Either way, they backed down. "This ain't over," Chet promised. "Not by half." "It never is," the stranger agreed. The three men retreated toward their horses, mounting up with backward glances full of promised violence. They rode off down the main street at a trot, leaving a cloud of dust hanging in the air like a curse. The silence that followed felt heavy, oppressive. Mei Lin straightened slowly, testing her ribs. Nothing broken, probably. She'd had worse. Her eye was swelling shut fast, and blood still dripped from the cut above her eyebrow. But she'd live. She always lived. The stranger approached slowly, hands visible, non-threatening. Up close she could see he was younger than his manner suggested. Maybe 35, 40 at most. Deep lines bracketed his mouth, and his eyes held the kind of shadows that came from seeing things that couldn't be unseen. "You all right?" he asked. Mei Lin wanted to laugh. All right. What a ridiculous question. She was bleeding in the street, her land was still under threat. The town still hated her, and she'd just watched another man risk his life for her while everyone else hid. "I'm alive," she said instead. Her voice came out rough. "That's close enough." He nodded like he understood exactly what she meant. "Name's Jack Callahan. Mei Lin." She touched her split lip gingerly, winced. "You shouldn't have done that." "Probably not." "They'll come back. With more men. Victor Kane doesn't let challenges stand." "I figured." "So why?" She studied him, trying to understand. In her experience, men did things for reasons. Greed, lust, pride. This man had nothing to gain from defending her. "Why would you step in?" Jack was quiet for a long moment, his gaze distant. "Had a sister once," he said finally. "Long time ago. Got herself in trouble. Wrong man, wrong place. I was off playing soldier, thought I was doing something important. By the time I got back..." He stopped, swallowed. "I got back too late. So when I see something like this, I guess I'm trying to make up for it. Stupid reason, probably." "Not stupid," Mei Lin said softly. "Futile, maybe, but not stupid." A bitter smile touched his lips. "Yeah, that sounds about right." Around them, Redemption Springs was coming back to life. Doors opened. People emerged, their curiosity finally overcoming their cowardice. Mei Lin felt their eyes on her, heard the whispers starting. By nightfall, the whole town would be buzzing with the story. The China girl and the stranger. Victor Kane's men run off. What would happen next? She knew what would happen next. She'd been through this cycle before, in smaller ways. Push back, and they pushed harder. That was the rule. "You should leave town," she told Jack. "Tonight. Ride far and don't look back. What about you? I can't leave. That land. She stopped, trying to find words for something she wasn't sure she understood herself. My husband bought it with everything he had. He's buried there. It's all I have left of him, of the life we were supposed to build. If I run now, it means he died for nothing, that everything he promised me was a lie. Might die anyway, you stay. Then I die on my land. She met his eyes. At least that means something. Jack studied her face, the defiance, the pain, the absolute certainty. Something shifted in his expression. Respect, maybe. Or recognition of a fellow stubborn fool. Well then, he said, guess I'm staying too. You don't owe me anything. No, he agreed, but I owe myself. I'm tired of riding away. Before Mei Lin could respond, a new voice cut across the street. That was quite a display. The speaker was a woman in her 50s, gray hair pulled back in a severe bun, wearing a simple dress that had been expensive once but was now years out of fashion. She approached with the bearing of someone who'd been somebody, somewhere else. Her eyes were sharp and calculating as they took in Mei Lin's injuries. Mrs. Abernathy, Mei Lin said carefully. Margaret Abernathy owned the boarding house, one of the few businesses in town that didn't belong to Victor Kane. She'd never been kind to Mei Lin, but she'd never been cruel either, just coldly indifferent, which in Redemption Springs counted as progressive. You're bleeding on the street, Mrs. Abernathy observed. Bad for business. Come inside. I'll tend those cuts. It wasn't kindness in her voice, just practicality. But Mei Lin had learned to take what she could get. I don't have money. Didn't ask for money. I asked you to stop bleeding where my customers can see it. Mrs. Abernathy's gaze shifted to Jack. You'll be wanting a room, I expect. I will, Jack confirmed. $2 a night, breakfast included. No whiskey in the rooms, no entertaining ladies, no fighting. My house, my rules. Fair enough. Mrs. Abernathy turned and walked toward the boarding house without checking to see if they followed. Mei Lin and Jack exchanged a glance, then trailed after her. As they walked, Mei Lin became aware of how much she hurt. Adrenaline was wearing off, leaving behind a catalog of pain. Her ribs ached with each breath. Her face throbbed. She tasted blood with every swallow. But she walked steady. She'd be damned if she'd limp. The boarding house was clean if sparse. Whitewashed walls, simple furniture, floors scrubbed within an inch of their lives. Mrs. Abernathy led them to a small kitchen and back and pointed Mei Lin toward a chair. Sit. Mei Lin sat. The older woman fetched water and clean cloth, working with efficient, impersonal movements. She cleaned the blood from Mei Lin's face, tisking at the split eyebrow. This needs stitches, she announced. I can do it myself. Don't be ridiculous. Hold still. Mei Lin held still. Mrs. Abernathy produced a needle and thread, sterilized them in whiskey, and set to work. The pain was sharp and immediate, but Mei Lin had suffered worse. She focused on breathing, on not flinching, on maintaining some scrap of dignity. Jack stood by the door, watching the street through a gap in the curtain. How long until Kane hears about this? He already knows, Mrs. Abernathy said, pulling thread through skin with practiced ease. Chet Morrison rode straight for the ranch. I'd say you've got until sundown before Victor decides what to do about you. And what do you think he'll do? Mei Lin asked. Kill you both, most like. Victor doesn't tolerate challenges. She finished the last stitch, knotted it, snipped the thread. There. Try not to get hit in the face again for at least a week. I'll do my best. Mrs. Abernathy cleaned her hands, studying Mei Lin with those sharp eyes. You could still run. Take what you can carry and go. California's a big place. Victor Kane's arm only reaches so far. I'm not running. Stubborn as ever. It wasn't quite approval in the older woman's voice, but it wasn't disapproval either. Your husband was the same way. Thomas never knew when to quit. Mei Lin looked up, surprised. Mrs. Abernathy rarely spoke of Thomas, rarely acknowledged that Mei Lin had been married to a white man, that she'd had any legitimate claim to respectability. You knew him? Everyone knew Thomas. Hard not to. He talked enough for 3 men. A ghost of a smile crossed her severe features. He was a good man. Naive, but good. He really believed all that nonsense about equality and brotherhood. Died still believing it, I suppose. He did. And you? What do you believe? Maylin touched her stitched eyebrow gingerly. What did she believe? She'd believed in Thomas once, in his vision of America. She'd believed in the possibility of belonging. Those beliefs had been beaten out of her, blow by blow, insult by insult. I believe that land is mine, she said finally, and I believe I'll die before I give it up. Mrs. Abernathy nodded, as if this confirmed something she'd suspected. Then I expect you'll die. Victor always gets what he wants. Not always, Jack said from the doorway. Not this time. And who are you exactly? Mrs. Abernathy turned her attention to him. Some kind of hero, going to save the day with your quick draw and noble intentions? No, ma'am. Just a man who's tired of watching. Watching what? Everything. Nothing. Does it matter? Jack's voice held a weariness that made Maylin's chest tighten. I've spent 10 years riding from one town to another, seeing the same thing play out. Strong prey on weak. Decent folk look away. Everyone tells themselves it's not their problem. I'm tired of it. Tired of being part of it. So you found your cause. Mrs. Abernathy's tone was dry. How very noble. Tell me, Mr. T. Callahan. Jack Callahan. Tell me, Mr. Callahan, what happens when Victor Kane sends 10 men instead of 3? 20? Will you stand against an army for a woman you don't know, over land that isn't yours? If it comes to that, it will come to that. Victor doesn't do half measures. Jack shrugged. Then I guess we'll see what happens. Mrs. Abernathy shook her head, but something in her expression had shifted. Not warmth exactly, but perhaps a thawing. You're both fools. But at least you're interesting fools. Better than the usual run of cowards I serve breakfast to. She moved to the stove where a pot of coffee sat warming. Poured 3 cups without asking if they wanted any, set them on the table. Drink, she ordered. And then you'd better figure out what you're going to do. Because Victor will come, and when he does, standing tall won't be enough. You'll need a plan. Maylin wrapped her hands around the cup, letting the warmth seep into her fingers. She looked at Jack, really looked at him. Tried to see past the calm exterior to whatever lay beneath. What made a man stand between strangers and violence? What drove someone to choose a losing fight? Why are you really here? She asked quietly. In Redemption Springs. Before today. Jack took a long drink of coffee before answering. I was passing through. Heard there might be work at one of the ranches, but he trailed off, something dark crossing his face. But I heard it was Victor Kane's operation. I've heard of Kane, the kind of man he is. Decided to keep riding, but my horse threw a shoe. Figured I'd stay one night, get the horse seen to, move on. And now? Now I'm staying. He met her eyes. For however long this takes, it might take dying. Yeah. A smile without humor. Wouldn't be the first time I've bet wrong on that. Mrs. Abernathy sat down with them, wrapping her own hands around a cup. If you're serious, and Lord help you both, I think you are, then you need to understand what you're up against. Victor Kane owns 12,000 acres. He's got 30 men on his payroll, most of them meaner than snakes. The sheriff's his cousin. The mayor owes him money. The judge in the county seat takes his bribes. There's no law coming to help you. No cavalry riding over the hill. I know, Maylin said. She'd learned that lesson thoroughly. And the town? Jack asked. What about them? Mrs. Abernathy's laugh was bitter. The town will watch you die and then go back to their dinners, just like they watched today. Oh, they'll feel bad about it. Maybe Pastor Matthews will say some nice words at your funeral, but they won't lift a finger to help. Fear's a powerful thing, Mr. Callahan. It keeps people small. Not everyone, Jack said, looking pointedly at Mrs. Abernathy. She waved a dismissive hand. I'm old. Already buried 1 husband and 2 sons. Victor Kane doesn't scare me because there's nothing left he can take. But these people? She gestured toward the window, toward the town beyond. They've got families, businesses, things they're afraid to lose. I don't blame them for their cowardice. I just wish they'd be honest about it. Maylin drank her coffee, thinking. Mrs. Abernathy was right about the town. She'd learned not to expect anything from them. But Jack's presence changed something. Not the odds. Those were still impossibly stacked against them. But the equation itself was different. She'd been alone so long she'd forgotten what it felt like to have someone stand with her. It was dangerous, this feeling. Hope. She'd sworn off hope. "We'll need guns," Jack said, his tone matter of fact. "Ammunition, supplies. If we're making a stand, we should be smart about it." "I have a rifle," Maylin offered. "Thomas's hunting rifle. I know how to use it." Jack nodded. "Good. I've got my revolver and a Winchester. We'll need more, though. And we'll need to make your place defensible. Where exactly is your land?" 4 miles north, up along the creek, 40 acres of mostly scrub, a small cabin, a well. She paused. "It's not much." "It's yours." That makes it something. The simplicity of that statement hit Maylin harder than any of Victor's punches. It's yours. Such a simple concept, such an impossible reality in a place like Redemption Springs. Mrs. Abernathy rose, refilling their cups. "If you're going to do this, and I can see you are, despite all sense, you'll need information. Victor's movements. How many men he has at the ranch at any given time, where they patrol. I can help with that." Jack looked at her in surprise. "Why would you do that?" "Because I'm tired too, Mr. Callahan. Tired of living in a town run by a tyrant. Tired of watching good people crushed while bad ones prosper. I can't fight, but I can watch. I can listen. I can pass along what I learn." She looked at Maylin. "Thomas used to come here for coffee. Did you know that? When he first arrived in town, before he met you, he'd sit in my kitchen and talk about building something better. I thought he was a fool then. I still think he was a fool. But maybe fools are what this world needs." Maylin felt something tight in her chest loosen. Not much. Just a fraction, but enough to let her take a deeper breath. "Thank you," she said quietly. "Don't thank me yet. You'll most likely die anyway." Mrs. Abernathy's tone was brisk, but her eyes were softer. "Now, let's talk practically. You can't go back to your land tonight. Victor will be watching. You'll stay here." "I can't pay." "Did I ask for payment? I swear, girl, you're as prickly as a cactus." Mrs. Abernathy shook her head. "Consider it an investment in chaos. If nothing else, watching you two irritate Victor Kane will be worth the price of a bed." Jack smiled, the first real smile Maylin had seen from him. It transformed his face, made him look younger, less haunted. "You're a dangerous woman, Mrs. Abernathy. I'm a woman who's outlived her fear. That's different." She stood, brushing invisible dust from her skirt. "I'll get rooms ready. You two should rest. Tomorrow's going to be difficult." After she left, Maylin and Jack sat in silence for a moment. The kitchen was warm, the coffee was hot, and for the first time in longer than she could remember, Maylin felt something other than alone. "You really going to do this?" she asked. "Stay and fight?" "I am." "Why?" Jack was quiet, staring into his cup like it held answers. When he spoke, his voice was low. "You asked earlier why I stepped in. I told you about my sister, and that's true, but it's not the whole truth." "What's the whole truth?" "The whole truth is I've been running for 10 years. Since the war. Since—" He stopped, started again. "I did things during the war, things I'm not proud of. Followed orders I shouldn't have followed. Looked away when I should have stood up, and when it was over, when I came home and found my sister." He swallowed hard. "I realized I'd spent so long being a coward in the name of duty that I'd forgotten how to be a man. So I ran. Kept running. Told myself I was looking for something, but really I was just hiding." "From what?" "From myself. From who I'd become." He looked up, meeting her eyes. "I saw you today, standing there with blood on your face, refusing to fall, and I saw someone who'd already made the choice I've been too afraid to make. To stop running. To stand for something, even if it kills you." Maylin absorbed this. That's not bravery. That's just having nowhere left to run. Maybe there's no difference. They sat with that thought, listening to the sounds of the town settling into evening. Somewhere a baby cried. A dog barked. Normal sounds of normal life continuing indifferently while they planned for violence. "Tell me about your land," Jack said after a while. "What's it like?" Maylin closed her eyes, picturing it. "Harsh. Beautiful. The cabin's small, just 2 rooms. Thomas built it with his own hands, and it shows. Nothing's quite square, and the roof leaks when it rains hard. But it's solid. There's a creek that runs along the northern boundary. In spring, wildflowers cover everything, yellows and purples. Thomas loved that. He'd pick them for me. Sounds like he loved you. He did. The ache that came with memories of Thomas was familiar now, worn smooth by time. He was a good man. Foolish, like Mrs. Abernathy said, but good. He believed people could be better than they are. I never had that faith, but I loved that he did. What brought you here, to America? Hunger. The word was simple, stark. You know what it's like to be truly hungry, Mr. Callahan. Not missing a meal hungry, starving hungry, watching people die hungry. I've seen it. Then you understand. Thomas came to our village offering food, medicine, hope. He told us about America, about land and opportunity, about a place where hard work mattered more than who your ancestors were. I was young enough to believe him, or desperate enough. I'm still not sure which. And when you got here, I found out that hope has borders, that the dream doesn't extend to everyone. She opened her eyes, looked at him. But I also found out I'm stronger than I thought. Thomas died and I wanted to die too, but I didn't. I kept working the land, kept fighting, and somewhere along the way I stopped doing it for him and started doing it for me. That land, it's not about Thomas anymore. It's about proving I exist, that I matter, that I can't just be erased. Jack nodded slowly. Yeah, I understand that. Do you? What are you proving? That I'm not the man I was. He drained his coffee, set the cup down with a soft clink. That I can still choose to do the right thing, even when it's stupid, even when it costs. It will cost, Maylin warned, everything. I know. Mrs. Abernathy returned then, keys in hand. Your rooms are ready. Second floor, end of the hall. I suggest you sleep while you can. Tomorrow we plan. The day after, she shrugged. The day after, we see if courage is enough. Maylin stood, testing her legs. The pain had settled into a deep ache, tolerable if she moved carefully. Jack rose too, and for a moment they stood there, two broken people bound by chance and choice. Thank you, Maylin said to him, for earlier, for now, for whatever comes next. Thank me if we live through it. If we don't, I'll thank you anyway. It's been a long time since anyone stood for me. Something passed across Jack's face, pain, regret, determination all mixed together. Then I'm glad I was here. They climbed the stairs in silence, Mrs. Abernathy watching them go. Maylin's room was small but clean, the bed covered in a worn but freshly laundered quilt. She sat on the edge of the mattress, suddenly exhausted beyond measure. Through the thin wall, she heard Jack moving in the next room. Heard him sigh, heard the creak of bed springs as he sat. Two strangers, separated by inches of wood, and bound by a promise neither had spoken aloud. Tomorrow, they would plan for war. Tomorrow, they would face Victor Kane's wrath. Tomorrow, they might die. But tonight Maylin Lin wasn't alone. And that was something. That was enough. She lay back, staring at the ceiling, touching the stitches above her eyebrow. They pulled when she frowned. Would scar, probably. Add to the collection of marks life had left on her. Outside, the sun was setting over Redemption Springs, painting the sky in shades of blood and gold. Beautiful and terrible, like everything else in this hard country. Maylin closed her eyes and, for the first time in 3 years, slept without fear. Because fear required hope to exist, and she'd finally let go of that burden. What came would come. She'd face it standing, and she wouldn't face it alone. That was enough. That was everything. Dawn came too early and brought reality with it. Maylin woke to stiffness in every joint, her face throbbing where the stitches pulled at her skin. For a moment she lay still, cataloging the damage. Ribs ached but functional, eyes swollen but not blind, hands sore from clenching into fists. She'd survived worse, though at the moment she couldn't remember when. A knock at her door made her tense. "It's Jack," came the voice through the wood. "Mrs. Abernathy's got breakfast ready. Says we need to eat before we plan." Maylin sat up slowly, testing each movement. Her reflection in the small mirror above the wash basin looked like something dragged behind a horse, one eye purple and half closed, the gash above her eyebrow angry and red around the stitches, her lips split and crusted with dried blood. Beautiful, she thought bitterly. Just beautiful. She washed her face carefully, avoiding the worst of the damage, then braided her hair back tight. The simple act of grooming felt like armor, like putting on a mask between herself and the world. When she opened the door, Jack was waiting in the hallway. He looked like he'd slept about as well as she had, which was to say, not at all. His eyes were shadowed, his jaw tight. But he'd shaved and his clothes were brushed clean, and he met her gaze without flinching at her battered face. "How you feeling?" he asked. "Like I got beaten in the street by 3 men. Fair enough." A ghost of a smile. "Mrs. Abernathy's in a mood. Fair warning." They descended together, the stairs creaking under their feet. The boarding house smelled of coffee and frying bacon, and despite everything, Maylin's stomach growled. She hadn't eaten since yesterday morning, before the world had tilted sideways. Mrs. Abernathy stood at the stove, working with the sharp efficiency of someone who'd fed hungry people for decades. She glanced up as they entered, her eyes cataloging Maylin's appearance with clinical detachment. "Sit," she ordered. "Both of you." They sat. She served them plates loaded with eggs, bacon, and thick slices of bread, then poured coffee so strong it could strip paint, took a seat across from them and folded her hands on the table. "Eat first," she said. "Then we talk." They ate in silence, the only sounds the scrape of forks on plates and the ticking of the kitchen clock. Maylin forced herself to chew and swallow, though her split lip made it painful. Food was fuel. She'd need fuel for what was coming. When their plates were empty, Mrs. Abernathy refilled their coffee cups and leaned back in her chair. "I did some thinking last night," she said, "about what you're planning, and I've come to a conclusion." "Which is?" Jack asked. "You're both idiots." She held up a hand before either could protest. "But you're committed idiots, and there's something to be said for that. So if you're going to do this, you're going to do it smart. That means information. That means preparation. That means not charging in like fools and getting yourselves killed in the first 5 minutes." "What do you suggest?" Maylin asked. Mrs. Abernathy stood and moved to a drawer, pulling out a folded piece of paper. She spread it on the table, a hand-drawn map of the area surrounding Redemption Springs. "This is the valley," she said, pointing. "Victor's ranch is here, south and west. Your land is here, north along the creek, 4 miles between. The problem is the town sits right in the middle, and Victor controls it. Any supplies you need, any help you might get, has to come through him." Jack studied the map. "What about the county seat? How far?" 20 miles east, and the law there is just as bought as the law here. Sheriff Dawson makes regular trips to visit his cousin. That'd be our sheriff, Tom Kane." "Kane's the sheriff too?" Maylin hadn't known that. "I thought his name was different. Tom took his mother's maiden name when he pinned on the badge. Thought it'd look better if the sheriff wasn't obviously Victor's blood. Didn't fool anyone with a brain, but that's a short list in Redemption Springs." Mrs. Abernathy tapped the map. "Point is, you're isolated. No law coming to help. No neighbors close enough to hear gunfire. If Victor decides to move on you, you'll be on your own." "We knew that already," Jack said. "Did you? Really?" Mrs. Abernathy's gaze was sharp. "Knowing something in theory and facing it in practice are different beasts. When those men come, and they will come, it won't be 3 drunk cowboys. It'll be Victor's whole crew, armed and mean and ready to finish this." Maylin set down her coffee cup with careful control. "How many men does he have?" 30 on the payroll. Maybe 20 actually worth a damn in a fight. The rest are ranch hands, not gunfighters, but they'll follow orders if Victor pushes hard enough." 20 against 2. Jack didn't sound fazed. "I've faced worse odds." "When was that?" "During the war." Something shuddered in Jack's expression. "Yeah, during the war." Mrs. Abernathy watched him for a long moment, then nodded. "I suppose you did. And I suppose you're still here, so you must be good at staying alive. But are you good enough to keep her alive too?" She gestured at Maylin, "because that's the real question." "I can keep myself alive," Maylin said sharply. "I've been doing it for 3 years without help." "Surviving and fighting are different things. You know how to shoot?" "Thomas taught me. I hunt for food." "Hunting rabbits and shooting men are different too." "Then I'll learn fast." Mrs. Abernathy's mouth twitched. Not quite a smile, but close. "You've got spine, I'll give you that. Thomas always said you were tougher than you looked. I didn't believe him at first. Chinese girl, half his size, fresh off the boat, didn't speak a word of English. I thought he'd married himself a burden. And now? Maylin kept her voice level, but something hot coiled in her chest. Now I think he married someone who might actually survive this godless country. If you're smart, if you're lucky. Mrs. Abernathy pulled the map closer. Here's what I know about Victor's operation. He keeps most of his men at the ranch, but he sends out patrols, usually 2 or 3 riders, checking fences, looking for rustlers, keeping an eye on things. They follow regular routes, regular times. Predictable. Jack leaned in, studying the map. How predictable? Morning patrol goes north at dawn, evening patrol goes south at sunset. They've been running the same pattern for 2 years. Victor's gotten comfortable, thinks nobody's stupid enough to challenge him. Until now, Maylin said. Until now. Mrs. Abernathy traced a line on the map. If you're going back to your land, and I assume you are, you'll want to go before the morning patrol. That gives you a few hours to prepare before they realize you're there. Prepare how? Jack asked. Fortify. Set up defensive positions. Make it clear you're not going to be pushed out easy. Mrs. Abernathy looked at Mei Lin. How's your cabin situated? Good sight lines? Mei Lin pictured it. It sits on a small rise, trees on 2 sides, the creek on the north. The south approach is open. You can see anyone coming for maybe 200 yards. That's something. What about the cabin itself? Solid walls. Wood. Thick, but not thick enough to stop bullets. Nothing's thick enough to stop enough bullets, Jack said quietly. But we can make it harder. Stack furniture against the walls, sandbags if we can get them. You won't get sandbags, Mrs. Abernathy said flatly. The general store won't sell to you, not after yesterday. Word's already spread. Victor put out the word that anyone who helps you will answer to him. Maylin had expected as much, but hearing it confirmed still stung. What can we get? From the stores? Nothing. From me? Mrs. Abernathy stood, moved to a pantry, and returned with a wooden crate. She set it on the table with a heavy thunk. Ammunition, 3 boxes of rifle rounds, 2 of pistol. Also flour, salt pork, coffee, and dried beans. Enough to last a week if you're careful. Jack stared at her. Why would you do this? Because I'm old and angry and tired of Victor Kane running this town like his personal kingdom. She met his eyes. And because I like Thomas. He was a good man in a place that eats good men alive. If his widow wants to make a stand, I'll be damned if I let her do it on an empty stomach. Maylin felt something tight in her throat. I'll pay you back. Somehow. You'll stay alive. That's payment enough. Mrs. Abernathy pushed the crate toward Jack. Get this loaded on your horse. I'll pack more supplies. Blankets, medical kit, whatever else I can spare. You'll want to leave within the hour, before the town wakes up proper. You've thought this through, Jack observed. I had all night. What else was I going to do? Sleep? She snorted. I'm 73 years old. I don't sleep much anymore. Just lie awake thinking about all the things I should have said, should have done, all the times I looked away when I should have stood up. Maybe helping you 2 fools is my way of balancing the scales before I meet my maker. They worked quickly after that, loading supplies into saddlebags and securing the crate to Jack's horse. The animal was a sturdy roan gelding with intelligent eyes and the look of a horse that had seen trouble before and wasn't easily spooked. Maylin's own horse was still at her cabin, assuming it hadn't been stolen or killed out of spite. The sun was just breaking the horizon when they finished preparations. The town was still mostly asleep, though smoke rose from a few chimneys and somewhere a rooster crowed. Mrs. Abernathy stood on the porch of the boarding house, arms crossed, watching them mount up. One more thing, she called out. There's a man you should talk to. Old Pete, runs the livery. He's no friend of Victor's, lost his son to one of Kane's men in a dispute 5 years back. He might be willing to help. Help how, so? Maylin asked. Information. Maybe supplies. Maybe more, if you ask right. Mrs. Abernathy's expression was grave. But be careful. Pete's been drinking heavy since his boy died. Some days he's sharp as a tack, other days... She shook her head. Just be careful. Jack tipped his hat to her. We will. Thank you. Don't thank me yet. Save it for if you live. They rode out of town, heading north, taking a back route that skirted the main street. The morning air was cool, almost cold, and Maylin's breath misted in front of her face. Her body protested every movement, her ribs especially, but she kept her back straight and her hands steady on the reins. They didn't speak until Redemption Springs was behind them, just dust and distance. You trust her? Jack asked finally. Malin considered. I don't know. She's never been kind before. But I don't think she's lying. She has no reason to help Victor. He doesn't own her the way he owns everyone else. The enemy of my enemy, Jack mused. Something like that. They rode in silence for a while, following the creek north. The landscape was harsh but beautiful in its own way. Scrub brush and scattered juniper, red rock formations jutting from the earth like bones. A hawk circled overhead, riding thermals in lazy spirals. Tell me about the war, Malin said suddenly. You mentioned it last night. Jack's jaw tightened. Not much to tell. There's always something to tell. You fought? Yeah, I fought. Which side? Union, 4th Cavalry, joined up in 62, thinking I was going to save the world. Make a difference. All that righteous nonsense young men tell themselves. And did you? Make a difference? Jack was quiet for so long Malin thought he wouldn't answer. When he did, his voice was flat, distant. I followed orders, burned farms, destroyed supplies, watched towns starve. We told ourselves it was necessary. Total war, Sherman called it. Break their will to fight. Break them so completely they can't ever rise again. Did it work? Yeah, it worked. We won. He spat the words like poison. And I came home to find my sister dead and my parents looking at me like I was a stranger. Like they could see all the things I'd done written on my face. Malin understood that look. She'd seen it in the mirror after Thomas died, after the first time someone spat on her in the street, and she'd done nothing because what could she do? The look of someone who'd learned that the world was uglier than they'd imagined and that they were part of the ugliness. Your sister, she said carefully. What happened to her? A man named Garrett. Local businessman, respected by everyone. She worked in his store. Jack swallowed hard. He forced himself on her. When she told people, they didn't believe her. Garrett was important, had friends. My sister was just a girl. They called her a liar, a whore. She couldn't take it, hung herself in our barn. I'm sorry. I was off playing hero while she needed me. And when I got back, Garrett was still walking around free, still respected, still untouchable. Jack's hand moved unconsciously to his gun. I wanted to kill him. Almost did. Put the barrel of my pistol right against his head. But I didn't pull the trigger. Told myself it wouldn't bring her back. That I'd be no better than him. All the things people say when they're looking for an excuse not to do what's necessary. What happened to him? Nothing. He's probably still there, still running his store, still hurting people. And I ran. Told myself I was being honorable. Really, I was just a coward. Jack looked at her, his eyes dark with old pain. That's why I stepped in yesterday. That's why I'm here. Because I'm tired of being that coward. Malin absorbed this. Courage and cowardice aren't opposites. Sometimes they're the same thing in different light. That philosophy? No, just something Thomas used to say. He had a lot of sayings. Most of them didn't make sense. A sad smile touched her lips. But that one stuck with me. They crested a small rise and Malin's heart clenched. There, across the scrubland, nestled against the creek with trees behind it, was her cabin. Home. Such as it was. It looked smaller than she remembered, more vulnerable. Just a simple structure of raw wood and determination, sitting alone in a landscape that seemed designed to swallow small things. That it? Jack asked. That's it. They rode closer and Malin's eyes scanned for damage. The door hung crooked on its hinges, kicked in, looked like. Windows were intact, but shutters hung loose. Her small garden plot was trampled, young plants crushed into the dirt. Anger burned through her fatigue. They dismounted and Jack drew his gun, approaching the cabin cautiously. Malin followed, her hand on the knife she kept in her belt. The door swung open at Jack's push, revealing the interior. It had been ransacked, furniture overturned, her few possessions scattered and broken. Thomas's books, his precious books that he'd carried all the way from Boston, lay torn and trampled. Her clothes ripped from their pegs. The trunk where she kept her marriage papers and Thomas's letters pried open and emptied. They'd even destroyed the small shrine she'd kept to honor Thomas's memory. The photograph of him smashed, the candles ground into the floor. Malin stood in the doorway taking it in. She'd expected this, known it would happen. but seeing it still hurt in a way she hadn't prepared for. Animals, Jack said quietly. No. Animals kill for food or territory. This is something meaner. She stepped inside, picking her way through the wreckage. This is cruelty for its own sake. She found her rifle in the corner, the stock cracked. Picked it up anyway, testing the action. Still worked, barely. Better than nothing. Jack was already moving through the cabin, his eyes assessing. We can secure this. Won't be comfortable, but we can make it defensible. How? First, we right what can be righted. Get the door fixed, windows secured. Then we block the vulnerable points. Stack what's left of your furniture against the walls. Give us some cover. Create firing positions. You said there's a good view to the south? Yes. Open ground for 200 yards. That's our killing field. Anyone comes that way, we'll see them long before they're in range. He moved to the window, looking out. The trees to the north and east give us cover, but also give them cover. That's a problem. The creek's too steep to cross easily on the north side. They'd have to approach on foot, and the bank's mostly mud. They'd be exposed. Good. So south is our primary threat vector. We set up here, fortify our position, and wait. Mei Lin set down her damaged rifle. And when they come? We make it costly, make them regret trying. Jack turned to face her. I'm not going to lie to you. Our chances aren't good. 20 men, even 15 against 2 is suicide mathematics. But if we're smart, if we're disciplined, we can make them think twice. And if we're lucky, maybe Victor decides you're not worth the trouble. You don't believe that. No, he admitted. I don't. Victor's the type who can't let a challenge stand. It's not about the land anymore. It's about pride. About showing everyone he's still in control. Then we'll probably die here. Yeah, probably. Mei Lin looked around at the wreckage of her home, her life. 3 years of struggle reduced to kindling and broken glass. She thought about running, about taking what she could carry and disappearing into the vastness of California, starting over somewhere new. But she'd already started over once. Come to a new country, learned a new language, buried a husband, fought for every inch of ground she stood on. She was tired of starting over. Then we die fighting, she said. Jack nodded slowly. Then we die fighting. They spent the next hour cleaning and fortifying. Jack repaired the door as best he could, using leather strips from his saddlebags to replace the broken hinges. Mei Lin gathered what furniture could still be used and positioned it according to Jack's instructions, creating barriers and cover points. It was hard work, made harder by her injuries. Her ribs screamed every time she lifted something heavy. But she worked through the pain, channeling it into focus. Around mid-morning, they heard hoofbeats. Jack's hand went to his gun immediately. How many? Mei Lin listened. 2 horses. Maybe 3. Get inside, stay low. She grabbed her rifle and positioned herself by the window while Jack took the doorway. Through the cracked shutter, she could see riders approaching from the south. 2 men moving at an easy trot. Not Victor's men. One was older, gray-haired, riding a sway-backed mare. The other was younger, maybe 20, with the nervous look of someone who'd rather be anywhere else. That's old Pete, Mei Lin said, recognizing the older man. From the livery. Mrs. Abernathy said he might help. And the kid? Don't know him. They waited as the riders approached. Old Pete raised a hand in greeting, calling out before he got too close. Hello, the cabin. Don't shoot if you please. Come in peace. Jack stepped out, gun still drawn but pointed down. That's close enough. Pete reined in about 30 yards out. Up close, Mei Lin could see he was older than she'd thought. Maybe 70, with the weathered face of someone who'd spent a lifetime outdoors. His eyes were roomy but sharp. You're the one caused all the fuss yesterday, Pete observed, looking at Jack. Stood up to Victor's boys. I am. Stupid thing to do. So I've been told. Pete hawked and spat. Margaret Abernathy sent word you might need supplies. Said you were planning to make a stand. That's right. Even stupider. But there was something approving in Pete's tone. But I suppose stupid's the only kind of brave left these days. This here's my grandson, Tommy. He's come to help. The younger man nodded nervously. Sir? Jack studied them both. Why would you help us? Pete's expression hardened. Victor Kane killed my son. Shot him dead over a property dispute 5 years back. Sheriff ruled it self-defense, though my boy didn't even carry a gun. Since then, I've been waiting for someone to stand up to that bastard. Didn't think it'd be a China girl and a drifter, but I'll take what I can get. Maylin stepped out of the cabin, rifle still in hand. What kind of help can you offer? Pete looked at her, taking in her battered face without flinching. Information, mostly. Victor's meeting with his men today, deciding how to handle you. I got sources in his operation. Stable hands, mostly. They talk more than they should. I can tell you what's coming before it comes. And supplies? Got some barrels you can fill with creek water, pile up for cover. Got some timber scraps from the livery. Not much, but enough to reinforce your walls. Tommy here's handy with a hammer. Jack glanced at Mei Lin, a silent question. She nodded. All right, Jack said. We'll take the help. But if this is some kind of trap... It ain't, Pete said flatly. I'm too old for games. Victor took my boy from me. I want him to hurt. Simple as that. They worked through the afternoon, Tommy proving surprisingly skilled at carpentry, reinforcing the cabin walls while Pete and Jack discussed defensive strategies. Mei Lin filled barrels with creek water and positioned them according to Jack's instructions, creating barriers that could stop bullets. Old Pete had brought news too, and none of it good. Victor's planning to move on you tomorrow night, he said, sitting on a barrel while Jack checked their ammunition. He's bringing 15 men. Figures that's enough to finish this quick. 15, Jack repeated. You're sure? That's what I heard. He's leaving some men at the ranch, can't leave it undefended, but 15's still more than enough to overrun this place. Mei Lin paused in her work, water sloshing in the bucket she carried. What's his plan? Surround us? Burn us out? Don't know specifics, but knowing Victor, he'll want it dramatic. Want everyone to see what happens to people who cross him. Pete's eyes were distant. He's got a mean streak wide as the valley. Always has. Tell me about him, Jack said. How'd he get his power? Pete snorted. Same way most men get power. Took it. His father was a land grabber back in the 40s, claimed half the valley through fraud and violence. Victor inherited all of it, plus his father's talent for cruelty. He's been expanding ever since, pushing out anyone who won't sell, buying up anyone who will. The law won't touch him because he is the law. The town won't stand against him because he owns the town. Everyone has a weakness, Mei Lin said. His is pride, Pete replied. Victor can't stand to lose, can't stand to look weak. That's why he'll come hard and fast. He needs to crush you publicly, make an example. Show everyone that challenging him ends in death. Jack loaded bullets into his rifle with mechanical precision. Then we make him pay for that pride. 2 against 15, Pete said. How you planning to make that work? Discipline, position, making every shot count. Jack looked up. We can't win, but we can make it hurt enough that maybe next time someone stands up to him, his men will think twice about following orders. That's a long game. I'm playing for more than just survival. They worked until sunset, transforming the cabin into something resembling a fortification. It wouldn't stop a determined assault, but it would slow one down. Give them fighting chances they wouldn't have otherwise. Tommy left before dark, nervous about being caught helping them. But old Pete stayed for dinner, salt pork and beans cooked over a small fire. Coffee, strong enough to wake the dead. You ever kill a man? Pete asked Jack suddenly. Yes? How many? Lost count during the war, after... Jack stared into his coffee. 3. All fair fights, if there is such a thing. And you? Pete looked at Mei Lin. You ever kill anyone? No. Think you can? When they come riding up with guns drawn and murder in their eyes, think you can pull that trigger? Mei Lin thought about the question seriously. Could she? 3 years ago, the answer would have been no. The girl who'd left China had been naive, gentle, raised to believe in harmony and peace. But that girl was dead. Killed by the same country that had promised her freedom. Yes, she said finally. I think I can. Pete nodded, satisfied. Good. Because hesitation will get you killed. These men, Victor's men, they won't hesitate. They'll shoot you down like a dog and not lose a minute of sleep. I know. After Pete left, riding back toward town under a sky thick with stars, Mei Lin and Jack sat in silence. The cabin felt smaller with just the two of them, more intimate. Outside, the creek babbled and somewhere an owl hooted. "You should get some sleep," Jack said. "I'll take first watch." "I won't sleep." "Try anyway." Mei Lin studied his profile in the firelight. "Are you scared?" "Terrified." The honesty of it surprised her. "You don't show it." "Practice. Spent enough years hiding fear that it's become habit." He turned to look at her. "But yeah, I'm scared. Scared of dying, scared of failing, scared that I'll freeze when it matters. Fear's always there. You just learn to work around it." Thomas was never scared, or if he was, he never showed it. Thomas sounds like either a very brave man or a very foolish one. Both, probably. Mei Lin smiled despite everything. "He proposed to me after knowing me for 2 weeks, married me after a month, brought me to America without speaking Chinese, without really knowing anything about my culture or my life, just faith that things would work out. And they didn't." "No, but for a little while they were beautiful." She stood, testing her sore ribs. "I'm going to try to sleep. Wake me in a few hours and I'll take over watch." "All right." She lay down on the bedroll they'd salvaged, using her coat as a blanket. The floor was hard and every position hurt, but exhaustion pulled at her. Through half-closed eyes, she watched Jack sitting by the window, silhouetted against the starlight, rifle across his knees. Two fools making a stand against impossible odds. It should have felt hopeless. Maybe it was hopeless. But lying there in the dark, listening to the creek and the wind and Jack's steady breathing, Mei Lin felt something she hadn't felt in years. Not hope exactly. Hope was too bright, too fragile. This was darker, grimmer. The feeling of someone who'd been pushed past the point of retreat and found a strange freedom in having nothing left to lose. Tomorrow Victor would come. Tomorrow they'd fight. Tomorrow they'd probably die. But tonight she wasn't alone. Tonight someone had chosen to stand with her. That would have to be enough. She woke to Jack's hand on her shoulder, his voice low and urgent. "They're coming." Mei Lin was on her feet before she was fully conscious, rifle in hand, heart hammering. The cabin was still dark, pre-dawn dark, that hollow hour when the world held its breath between night and morning. "How many?" Her voice came out steadier than she felt. "Can't tell yet. Heard horses about 10 minutes ago. Coming from the south, moving slow." Jack was already at the window, peering through a gap in the shutters. "They're being cautious. That's smart." Mei Lin moved to the opposite window, her hands slick with sweat on the rifle stock. Through the dim light, she could make out shapes moving across the scrubland. Riders, spreading out in a line. More than she'd hoped, fewer than she'd feared. "I count 12, Jack said. "Maybe 13. They're staying out of rifle range for now." "Where are the others?" Pete said 15. "Could be flanking. Could be Victor held some back." Jack's jaw was tight. "Doesn't matter. 12's enough." The riders stopped about 300 yards out, just visible in the growing light. Mei Lin could see them conferring, pointing toward the cabin, planning their approach. Her mouth was desert dry, and every injury from 2 days ago throbbed in time with her pulse. "You ready for this?" Jack asked without looking away from the window. "No." "Good. Me neither." He checked his rifle, then his pistol. "Remember what we talked about. Pick your targets, make the shots count. And if it goes bad, if they breach the cabin, you run for the creek. Don't look back. Don't hesitate. Just run." "I'm not running." "Mei Lin," I said, "I'm not running. We stand together or we die together. That was the deal." Jack turned to look at her then, something unreadable in his expression. "You're the most stubborn woman I've ever met." "I know." A shout came from the riders, a voice she recognized even at this distance, Chet Morrison, loud and mean as ever. "You in the cabin! This is your last chance! Come out now, and maybe you live," Jack called back, his voice carrying across the empty ground. "Go to hell, Chet." "Your funeral, stranger. Victor wants the China girl alive, but he don't care how alive. We're coming in." The riders spurred their horses forward, splitting into 2 groups. One group, 6 men, charged straight at the cabin. The other 6 peeled off, circling toward the east, trying to flank them through the trees. "Here we go," Jack breathed. He fired first, the crack of his Winchester splitting the dawn. One of the charging riders jerked backward, tumbled from his saddle. The other scattered, returning fire as they rode. Bullets thudded into the cabin walls, splintered wood, sang through the air like angry wasps. Mei Lin aimed at a rider coming hard from the left. Squeezed the trigger. The rifle kicked against her already bruised shoulder and pain exploded through her ribs. She'd missed. The rider kept coming. She worked the bolt, aimed again, fired. This time the horse screamed and went down, throwing its rider hard into the dirt. The noise was incredible. Gunfire from all directions, men shouting, horses screaming. Smoke stung her eyes. Her hand shook as she reloaded, fumbling with bullets. "East side!" Jack yelled. "They're coming through the trees!" Mei Lin swung her rifle toward the eastern window just as a man burst from the tree line on foot, gun raised. She fired without thinking, the shot taking him high in the chest. He dropped like a puppet with cut strings. She'd killed a man. The realization hit her with the force of a physical blow. She'd actually done it, ended a life. There was a body on her land leaking blood into the dirt, and she'd put it there. No time to think about it. Another rider appeared, firing as he came. The window beside her exploded inward, glass and wood fragments cutting her cheek. She dropped below the sill, worked the bolt, popped back up and fired. Missed, fired again. The rider's horse reared and he fought to control it, giving Jack time to line up a shot that dropped the man from the saddle. "They're pulling back," Jack shouted. He was right. The riders were retreating, dragging wounded with them, falling back to regroup. Mei Lin counted bodies, 3 down, not moving. Maybe 2 more wounded, but that still left 7 or 8 men out there, and they'd be coming again. She touched her cheek and her fingers came away bloody. Just a scratch from the flying glass, but it stung. "You hit?" Jack asked, reloading with mechanical efficiency. "No, you?" "I'm good." He peered through the shattered window. "They're regrouping. They'll come harder next time. Try to overwhelm us." Mei Lin's hands trembled as she reloaded. She could still see the man she'd killed, the way he'd dropped, the terrible finality of it. Her stomach churned. "First one's always the hardest," Jack said quietly, not looking at her. "Does it get easier?" "No, you just get number." The riders were conferring again, their voices carrying in the still morning air. She heard Chet's voice, angry and frustrated, heard another voice, calmer, more controlled, planning. "They're going to burn us out," Mei Lin said suddenly, the realization hitting her. "That's what I'd do. We can't shoot what we can't see. If they set fire to the cabin, we have to come out or suffocate." Jack swore. "You're right, and we can't defend against that. Not with just 2 of us. So what do we do?" Before he could answer, something arced through the air from the direction of the riders. A bottle with a burning rag stuffed in the neck. It hit the ground 20 feet short of the cabin and exploded in a wash of flame. "Son of a..." Jack scrambled back from the window. "They're trying to range us. Next one will be closer." Another bottle flew, this one shattering against the cabin's south wall. Fire spread across the dry wood, crackling hungrily. Smoke began to seep through the cracks. "We need to move," Jack said. "Now, before the whole place goes up." "Move where?" "The creek. We make a run for it. Use the bank for cover. It's the only chance." Mei Lin looked around the cabin, her home, everything she had left of Thomas and the life they'd tried to build. Flames licked at the walls, smoke thickened. She'd fought so hard to keep this place. The idea of abandoning it felt like surrender, but Jack was right. Stay and burn, or run, and maybe live. "All right," she said, "we run." They grabbed what they could, ammunition, canteens, a blanket. Jack kicked open the back door, and they burst out into the morning, running low toward the creek. Bullets kicked up dirt around their feet. Mei Lin's ribs screamed with every step, but she pushed through it, following Jack's lead. They slid down the muddy bank to the creek, water soaking their legs, and took cover behind an outcropping of rock. Above them, the cabin was fully engulfed now, flames reaching toward the pale sky. 3 years of her life burning to ash. "I'm sorry," Jack said, breathing hard. "Don't be. You were right." Mei Lin checked her rifle, still loaded, still dry. "Now what?" "Now we make them pay for every inch." The riders were approaching more cautiously now, using the smoke from the burning cabin as cover. Mei Lin could see them moving through the haze, dark shapes, predatory and patient. They knew they'd won. Now it was just a matter of closing in for the kill. Jack fired, the shot echoing off the creek bank. One of the shapes dropped. The others scattered, taking cover. Come on, Chet's voice, furious now. It's 2 against 8, rush them. But they didn't rush. They'd seen what 2 people with good positions and desperation could do. They'd lost 5 men already, maybe 6. That was enough to make them think. A voice called out. Not Chet this time. Calmer. Older. This is Dutch Keller. I know you can hear me. Here's how this ends. You throw down your guns and come out. The woman lives. Mr. Kane's word on it. You, stranger, you die quick. Clean. That's mercy, considering. Or you keep fighting, we kill you both slow. Your choice. His word shit, Maylin shouted back. He'll kill us both. Probably, Dutch admitted. But this way you got a chance. Keep fighting. You got none. Think about it. Jack glanced at her. What do you think? I think they're lying, and even if they're not, I'd rather die free than live on Victor Kane's mercy. That's what I figured. He raised his voice. Here's our counteroffer, Dutch. You ride away, tell Victor the land's not for sale, and we forget this happened. Dutch laughed, but it sounded forced. You know that's not how this works. Then I guess we're at an impasse. Silence stretched. Maylin counted heartbeats, counted breaths. Her whole body ached, and the cut on her cheek had started bleeding again. She was thirsty, exhausted, terrified. But underneath all of that was something else, something hard and bright and utterly unwilling to bend. She would not give Victor Kane the satisfaction. Movement on the ridge above the creek. 2 men, trying to get the high ground. Jack saw them too and fired, missing, but forcing them back. Maylin shifted position, trying to get an angle. That's when she heard the hoofbeats coming from the north. More riders. Had to be. Victor must have held back reserves, waiting to cut off their escape. They were surrounded now, pinned against the creek with enemies on all sides. This was it. This was how it ended. But the gunfire that erupted came from the wrong direction. The new riders weren't shooting at them. They were shooting at Victor's men. Maylin risked a glance and saw something impossible. Old Pete on his sway-backed mare, rifle blazing, his grandson Tommy beside him, and behind them, townspeople. Maybe a dozen riders, armed and angry, pouring down from the north like the wrath of every coward who'd ever looked away and hated themselves for it. What the? Jack stared. Mrs. Abernathy was there, riding side saddle with a shotgun across her lap. The blacksmith, whose name Maylin had never learned. A few ranch hands she recognized from failed attempts to buy supplies. Even Pastor Matthews, looking terrified but determined, brandishing what appeared to be an ancient musket. They hit Victor's men from behind and from the side. And suddenly, the mathematics of the fight shifted. 8 against 2 became 8 against 15. The battle descended into chaos. Victor's men tried to regroup, but they were caught in a crossfire pinned between the creek and the newcomers. Chet Morrison went down with a bullet in the leg, screaming. Another man threw down his gun and raised his hands in surrender. Dutch Keller, to his credit, kept fighting. He and 2 others made a stand near the burning cabin, trading shots with the townspeople. But they were outnumbered now, and everyone could see it. Enough! A new voice cut through the gunfire. Enough, damn you all! Victor Kane himself rode into view, flanked by 3 more men. He sat tall in his saddle, dressed in black like some kind of frontier lord, his face twisted with rage. You people have lost your minds, he roared. This is my land, my valley. You work for me. Not anymore. Old Pete's voice was steady, his rifle pointed at Victor's chest. We're done being afraid of you, Kane. You'll hang for this, all of you. I'll see you. The shot came from the creek bank. Maylin had moved without thinking, her rifle already rising, her finger finding the trigger. The bullet took Victor's hat clean off his head, and he froze, suddenly aware that he was well within range and very mortal. Get down, Maylin said, her voice carrying across the sudden silence. Get off your horse and get down on the ground. Now. Victor's face went purple. You don't give me orders, you Chinese. She fired again, this time close enough that he felt the wind of it. His horse danced sideways, spooked. I said down. For a long moment, Victor Kane stared at her across the burning ruins of her cabin, across the bodies of his men, across the gulf between what he'd been and what he was becoming. She could see the calculation in his eyes, the weighing of odds, the measuring of pride against survival. Slowly, his hands shaking with rage, he dismounted. On your knees, Jack ordered. emerging from cover with his Winchester trained on Victor's remaining men. "All of you. Guns on the ground. Hands on your heads." They complied, one by one. Even Dutch Keller, bleeding from a shoulder wound, lowered his weapon and knelt. It was over, and everyone knew it. The townspeople approached slowly, weapons still ready, faces showing a mixture of triumph and terror at what they'd just done. Mrs. Abernathy rode her horse right up to where Victor knelt in the dirt, looking down at him with cold satisfaction. "You should have left her alone, Victor," she said. "That's all you had to do. Just leave one woman alone." "This isn't over," Victor spat. "I'll have the law on all of you. The governor himself." "The law?" Old Pete laughed bitterly. "Your cousin the sheriff ran like a rabbit soon as he heard we were riding out. The law's got nothing to say about this." Mei Lin climbed out of the creek, water streaming from her clothes, rifle still in hand. Every eye turned to her as she approached. She was soaked, battered, bleeding from a dozen small cuts. Behind her, her cabin collapsed inward with a groan of burning timber, sending sparks spiraling into the morning sky. Everything she'd had, everything she'd fought for, gone. She stopped in front of Victor Kane, this man who'd made her life hell for 3 years. This powerful landowner who'd beaten her in the street, ransacked her home, tried to burn her alive. He knelt in the dirt now, brought low, and she held his life in her hands. "You took everything from me," she said quietly. "I'll give it back." Victor's voice was desperate now, all bluster gone. "The land, money, whatever you want, just—" "You can't give back my husband. You can't give back 3 years of fear and pain. You can't give back the life I was promised." She pressed the rifle barrel against his forehead, and he flinched. "So tell me why I shouldn't kill you right now." The crowd held its breath. Victor's remaining men watched with wide eyes. Even Jack had gone very still. Mei Lin's finger rested on the trigger. It would be so easy. One squeeze, one bullet, an end to the man who'd tormented her, who represented everything cruel and unjust about this country she'd been foolish enough to believe in. She wanted to do it. Wanted it with a ferociousness that scared her. But somewhere in the back of her mind, she heard Thomas's voice. Gentle, naive Thomas, who'd believed in redemption and second chances, who'd thought people could be better than their worst impulses. He'd been wrong about so much, but maybe not about everything. "Because," she said finally, lowering the rifle, "killing you would make me like you, and I'd rather die than be anything like you." The relief on Victor's face was pathetic. "But," Mei Lin continued, her voice hardening, "you're done here. Finished. You're going to sign over your land to the people who work it. You're going to leave this valley and never come back. And if I ever see you again, if I even hear your name—" She pressed the rifle barrel against his forehead again, hard enough to leave a mark. "I won't hesitate the second time." "You can't," Victor started. "I can. We all can." She gestured to the townspeople surrounding them. "You don't own us anymore. We're not afraid anymore. So you'll do what I say, or we'll end this right now. Your choice." Victor looked around at the faces of people who'd cowered before him for years, saw no mercy there, saw only the cold certainty that his time was done. "Fine," he whispered. "I'll go. Swear it, in front of everyone. I swear it." His voice was broken. "I swear I'll leave and never come back." Mei Lin stepped back, suddenly exhausted beyond measure. Her legs trembled, and she thought she might fall. But Jack was there, his hand on her elbow, steadying her. "You heard him?" Jack called to the crowd. "Everyone here is a witness. Victor Kane is exiled from this valley. Anyone who helps him, anyone who tries to enforce his claims, answers to all of us." A murmur of agreement rippled through the townspeople. Mrs. Abernathy nodded approvingly. Old Pete spat in the dirt near Victor's knees. "Get up," Jack ordered. "Take your men and ride out. You've got until sundown to be clear of the valley. After that, we shoot on sight." Victor climbed to his feet slowly, his dignity in tatters. His men gathered around him, the wounded, the surrendered, the survivors. They looked like what they were now, just men. Dangerous still, but no longer untouchable. They mounted their horses in silence and rode south, not looking back. Chet Morrison, leg bandaged and face pale with pain, was the last to leave. He glared at Mei Lin with pure hatred. "This isn't over," he promised. "Yes, it is," she replied. "You just don't know it yet." They watched until those riders were just dust on the horizon. Then slowly, the tension broke. Someone laughed, a nervous, slightly hysterical sound. Someone else joined in. Soon the whole group was laughing, crying, embracing each other with the wild relief of people who'd survived the impossible. Pastor Matthews approached Mei Lin, his hands shaking. "I've never shot at anyone before. I can't believe I just—" "You stood up," Mei Lin said simply. "That's more than most people ever do. Thank you." "I should have stood up years ago. We all should have." He looked at the burning cabin, the bodies being tended to, the morning sun breaking full over the valley. "What happens now?" "Now," Mei Lin looked at Jack, at Mrs. Abernathy, at old Pete and Tommy, and all these people who'd risked everything. "Now we rebuild, all of us, together, make this valley into what it should have been all along." "And Victor?" the pastor asked. "You really think he'll stay gone?" "If he's smart." Jack's hand rested on his gun. "If not, we'll be ready." Mrs. Abernathy dismounted with a grunt, surveying the damage. "You'll need a new cabin. Can't live in a pile of ash." "I know. The boarding house is yours until we get something built. No arguments." The old woman's face was stern, but her eyes were kind. "And we'll all help build it. Make it proper this time. Strong enough to last." Mei Lin felt something hot behind her eyes. Tears, she realized. When was the last time she'd cried? Not at Thomas's funeral, not during 3 years of harassment and pain, but now, surrounded by people who'd chosen to fight for her, the dam broke. She wept, and Mrs. Abernathy held her, and nobody said anything because sometimes there was nothing to say. The sun climbed higher, burning off the morning haze. They tended the wounded, both sides, because that's what decent people did. They buried the dead. They salvaged what could be salvaged from the ruins. And they talked. Plans spilled out. For the valley, for the land, for a future none of them had dared imagine yesterday. The blacksmith suggested they form a council to make decisions together. The ranch hands talked about dividing up Victor's land fairly among those who worked it. Pastor Matthews, emboldened by his morning's violence, proposed building a real school. Through it all, Mei Lin sat on the creek bank with Jack, watching the activity, too tired to join in just yet. "You could have killed him," Jack said quietly. "I saw it in your eyes. You wanted to." "I did." "So why didn't you?" Mei Lin was silent for a long moment, thinking. "Because my husband died believing people were basically good, that we could build something better. I thought he was a fool. Maybe he was, but—" She gestured at the townspeople working together, laughing together, planning together. "Maybe fools see things the rest of us miss." Jack smiled. "You're a better person than me." "I doubt that." "It's true. I would have pulled the trigger. Hell, part of me wanted you to." "The part of you that's still fighting the war?" "Yeah, that part." He picked up a stone and tossed it into the creek. "But maybe it's time to let that part go. Maybe that's what this was about. Not just your fight. Mine, too." "And now?" "Now I guess I'm staying, if you'll have me. Help rebuild. Help make sure this valley becomes what it's supposed to be." He looked at her. "If that's all right with you." Mei Lin thought about it. Thought about Jack stepping between her and violence, about him standing with her when he could have walked away, about the way he'd fought, not for glory or profit, but because it was right. "It's more than all right," she said. They sat in comfortable silence, watching the valley come alive with possibility. The cabin was gone, but the land remained. Her land, bought with Thomas's dreams and defended with her blood and Jack's bullets and the courage of people who'd finally found their spines. Old Pete approached, offering them each a canteen of water. "Hell of a morning," he observed. "That's one way to put it," Jack replied. "You know Victor's not going to stay gone. Man like that, pride won't let him. He'll be back or he'll send others. You ready for that?" Mei Lin took a long drink, then met Pete's eyes. "We'll be ready, all of us. That's the difference now. We're not alone anymore." "No," Pete agreed, looking at the townspeople. "I suppose we're not. Funny how that works. You spend years being afraid, and then one day you just aren't, and everything changes." "What changed?" Mei Lin asked. "We did. You showed us it was possible to stand up, to fight back, to be more than what we'd settled for being." He squinted into the sun. My boy would have liked you. He had that same stubborn streak. Got him killed, but at least he died for something. I'm sorry for your loss. Don't be. I'm just glad I finally did something he'd be proud of." Pete tipped his hat and walked away, leaving them to their thoughts. The day wore on. The last of Victor's men were sent packing, their weapons confiscated, their dignity stripped. Word was sent to the county seat explaining what had happened, carefully worded to emphasize self-defense and community action. Nobody expected the law to care, but at least now there was a record. By afternoon, the burned cabin had cooled enough to search through the rubble. Mei Lin picked through the ash with a stick, looking for anything salvageable. Most of it was gone. The furniture, the books, her clothes. But she found Thomas's pocket watch, the case charred but the mechanism inside still intact. Found her wedding ring, which she'd hidden under a floorboard because she was afraid someone would steal it. She slipped the ring onto her finger for the first time in a year. It felt right there, like reclaiming something she'd thought lost. "Find anything?" Jack asked, helping her search. "Pieces, fragments, enough to remember by." She held up the pocket watch. "Thomas carried this every day. Said it kept him connected to home. Now it's all I have left of him." "That and 40 acres of land he died believing in." "That and 40 acres, she agreed. They worked through the afternoon, clearing debris, marking out where a new cabin would be built. "Bigger this time," Mrs. Abernathy insisted. "Room for growth, room for the future." As the sun began to set, painting the valley in shades of orange and gold, the townspeople gathered one more time. They were dirty, exhausted, still processing what they'd done. But there was something different in their faces now, something that hadn't been there before. Pride, self-respect, the knowledge that they'd stood for something. Pastor Matthews cleared his throat. "I think we should say something. Mark this day. Remember what happened here." "A prayer?" someone suggested. "No," Mei Lin said quickly. "Not a prayer. A promise." They looked at her, waiting. She searched for words, trying to capture everything she felt. "We promise to never look away again, to stand for each other, to build something here that's worth defending, a place where it doesn't matter where you came from or what you look like, where what matters is how you treat people, how you show up when things are hard." "I can live with that," old Pete said. "Me too," Mrs. Abernathy added. One by one, they all agreed. A promise made in blood and ash, witnessed by the dying light and the land itself. As the crowd dispersed, heading back to town, Mei Lin stood alone on the rise where her cabin had been. Jack had gone to help load the wounded onto wagons. Mrs. Abernathy was organizing sleeping arrangements. Everyone had something to do, somewhere to be. But Mei Lin needed this moment, needed to stand here and feel the weight of everything that had happened. She'd lost her home, killed a man, faced down the monster who tormented her. And somehow, impossibly, she'd won. Not just survived, won. The land spread out before her, harsh and beautiful in the fading light. Her land, bought with dreams, defended with blood, and now truly hers in a way it had never been before. She heard footsteps and turned to find Jack approaching. "Everyone's heading back to town," he said. "You ready?" "In a minute." She turned back to the view. "I want to remember this, how it feels, in case I ever forget why it mattered." Jack stood beside her in silence for a long moment. Then he said, "You did good today. Thomas would be proud." "You think?" "I know. You took everything they threw at you and didn't break. That's what he saw in you. That strength." Mei Lin thought about Thomas, about his gentle hands and his impossible dreams, about the way he'd loved her without really understanding her, and how she'd loved him anyway. "I wish he could have seen this," she said quietly. "See what we built, what we're going to build." "Maybe he can." Jack's voice was soft. "I'm not much for religion, but I like to think the people we lose stay with us somehow, in the choices we make, the things we fight for." "Is that what you tell yourself about your sister?" "It's what I have to tell myself. Otherwise, the grief would eat me alive." They stood together as the last light faded, two broken people who'd found purpose in each other's fight. Tomorrow would bring new challenges. Victor might return. The law might interfere. Winter would come and the land would test them. But tonight they'd won, and that was enough. The wagon ride back to town felt longer than the 4 miles warranted. Maylin sat in the back with the wounded, her body finally registering every bruise, every cut, every screaming muscle. Jack rode alongside on his roan, keeping watch though the threat had passed. For now, anyway. Mrs. Abernathy drove the wagon with the practiced hand of someone who'd navigated worse roads in harder times. She didn't speak much, but occasionally she'd glance back at Maylin with something that might have been approval. They reached Redemption Springs as full dark settled over the valley. Windows glowed with lamplight. Doors opened as people emerged to see the returning fighters. Some faces showed relief. Others showed fear at what they'd done, what it might cost them. Sheriff Tom Kane stood on the steps of his office, watching them pass. He'd run earlier, according to old Pete, but now he was back, trying to salvage whatever authority he had left. His hand rested on his gun, but he didn't draw, just watched with narrowed eyes as the wagon rolled past. "That one's going to be a problem," Jack observed quietly, riding closer to the wagon. "Let him try," Mrs. Abernathy said. "He's got no one to back him now. Victor's gone and his deputies are cowards. Tom Kane without his cousin is just a bully with a badge." They pulled up in front of the boarding house, and people emerged to help unload the wounded. The town doctor, a thin man named Pritchard, who usually charged double for treating anyone who wasn't white, took one look at Maylin and hesitated. "She fought with us," old Pete said sharply. "She led us. You'll treat her same as anyone else, or you'll answer to me." Pritchard swallowed and nodded. "Of course. Let me see that eye." Maylin sat on Mrs. Abernathy's porch while the doctor worked, cleaning the cuts on her face, checking her ribs. His hands were gentle, but his expression remained uncomfortable, like he was touching something distasteful. "Ribs are bruised but not broken," he announced finally. "The stitches above your eye are holding. Keep them clean, and they should heal without much scarring. The other cuts are superficial." He paused. "You were lucky." "Luck had nothing to do with it," Jack said from the doorway. Pritchard didn't respond to that. He packed his bag and moved on to the next patient, and Maylin was left sitting in the lamplight, feeling the full weight of exhaustion settle over her like a blanket. Mrs. Abernathy brought her coffee and a plate of food, bread, cheese, some kind of stew. "Eat. You look half dead." "I feel half dead." "Then eat anyway. Dead people don't need strength. Living ones do." Maylin forced herself to eat, though every swallow hurt her split lip. Around her, the town buzzed with nervous energy. People gathered in small groups, talking in low voices, reliving the battle, processing what they'd done. She caught fragments of conversation as she ate. Never seen anything like it. Victor's face when she put that rifle to his head. What if he comes back with the army? Worth it, even if he does. Jack joined her on the porch, his own plate in hand. They ate in silence for a while, too tired for words. Finally, he said, "You should sleep. You've been going on fumes since yesterday." "So have you." "I'm used to it. You're not." Maylin looked at him, really looked. He did look used to it, she realized. The exhaustion, the violence, the constant alertness. This was his normal. Had been for years. What a terrible way to live. "After you sleep," Jack continued, "we need to talk about what comes next." "What is there to talk about? We rebuild. We keep watch. We live. It's not that simple. Victor signed nothing, made no legal transfer of land. Far as the law's concerned, he still owns half this valley. And the law," he gestured toward the sheriff's office, "is still his law. Then we change the law." "How? You gonna run for sheriff?" The idea was so absurd, Maylin almost laughed. A Chinese woman as sheriff? They'd never... Exactly. That's the problem. We won a battle today. But the war? That's going to take longer, be harder, and it's going to require more than just fighting. Mrs. Abernathy emerged from the house, wiping her hands on her apron. "He's right. What you did today was magnificent. Stupid, but magnificent. Now comes the hard part, making it stick." "How do we do that?" Maylin asked. "Politics, paperwork, the boring work of actually building something." Mrs. Abernathy sat heavily in a rocking chair. "Victor's land needs to be legally transferred. The ranch broken up and distributed. A new sheriff elected. Town charter rewritten. It's going to take months, maybe years. And in the meantime? In the meantime, we hold what we took. Keep watch. Make sure Victor doesn't sneak back in the night and undo everything. Maylin set down her plate, appetite gone. She'd been so focused on surviving the fight that she hadn't thought beyond it. But Mrs. Abernathy was right. Winning was just the beginning. I don't know how to do any of that, she admitted. Politics, paperwork? I can barely read English well enough to get by. Then you'll learn, Mrs. Abernathy said simply. Or you'll find people who can do it for you. That's what community means. Nobody has to know everything, just enough, together. A commotion down the street drew their attention. Sheriff Kane was approaching with 2 deputies flanking him. He walked with forced confidence, hand still on his gun. Here we go, Jack muttered, standing. Kane stopped at the bottom of the porch steps. I'm placing you all under arrest. Vigilante justice, assault, attempted murder. You've got no authority to exile Victor Kane or seize his property. We've got the authority of people who are tired of your family's tyranny, old Pete said, emerging from the crowd that had gathered. You want to arrest us? Go ahead. Arrest all of us. See how that works out. Kane looked at the faces surrounding him. Maybe 30 people, all of them armed, all of them tired of being pushed around. His deputies shifted nervously. The law, Kane started. The law is what we make it, Mrs. Abernathy interrupted. And we're making new law, starting with a new sheriff, someone who actually represents the people instead of one family's interests. You can't just, we can. We did. And unless you want to join your cousin in exile, I suggest you turn in that badge and walk away while you still can. Kane's face went red. His hand tightened on his gun, and for a moment Maylin thought he might actually draw. But he looked around again at all those faces, all those weapons, and whatever courage he'd mustered drained away. This isn't over, he said, but the words rang hollow. Yes, it is, Jack said quietly. You just don't want to admit it. Kane stood there a moment longer, then turned and walked away, his deputies trailing behind him. The crowd watched until he disappeared into the sheriff's office, then erupted in celebration. But Maylin didn't celebrate. She felt only a bone-deep weariness and the growing realization that they'd opened a door they couldn't close, changed something fundamental. And now they'd have to live with the consequences. Mrs. Abernathy showed her to a room upstairs, the same one she'd stayed in before. It felt like years ago instead of 2 nights. Maylin collapsed onto the bed fully clothed and was asleep before her head hit the pillow. She dreamed of fire and blood and Thomas's face fading into smoke. She woke to bright sunlight streaming through the window and the sound of hammering. For a disoriented moment, she couldn't remember where she was or what had happened. Then it all came flooding back, and she sat up with a gasp. Her body screamed in protest. Every muscle had stiffened overnight. Her ribs felt like someone had driven railroad spikes through them. Moving hurt. Breathing hurt. Existing hurt. She made herself stand yet anyway, made herself wash her face in the basin by the window. Her reflection looked like something from a nightmare, one eye still swollen nearly shut, stitches stark against bruised skin, her lip crusted with dried blood. Beautiful. Downstairs she found Mrs. Abernathy cooking breakfast while Jack sat at the table cleaning his guns. The domestic scene was surreal given everything that had happened. Coffee's hot, Mrs. Abernathy said without looking up from the stove. Breakfast in 5 minutes. Sit down before you fall down. Maylin sat. Jack glanced at her and winced sympathetically. How you feeling? Like I was beaten, shot at, and didn't sleep for 3 days. That's because you were beaten, shot at, and didn't sleep for 3 days. He set aside the revolver he'd been cleaning. The town's already organizing. They're meeting at the church in an hour to discuss next steps. You should be there. Why? I don't know anything about organizing towns. Because you're the reason we're organizing in the first place. People listened to you yesterday. They'll listen today. Maylin sipped her coffee, letting the heat chase away some of the fog in her head. I'm not a leader. I'm just someone who is too stubborn to run. Sometimes that's all leadership is, Mrs. Abernathy said, setting plates of eggs and bacon in front of them. Being too stubborn to quit when everyone else wants to. They ate quickly and walked to the church together. The building was already packed with people, townspeople, ranch hands, farmers from the outlying areas who'd heard what happened and come to see for themselves. The air buzzed with excited, nervous conversation. Pastor Matthews stood at the front, looking overwhelmed. When he saw Maylin enter, relief flooded his face. Thank heaven, he caught himself. I'm glad you're here. Everyone wants to know what we should do. I don't have answers, Maylin said. Then we'll figure them out together. He raised his voice. Everyone, can we have order, please? The crowd settled, all eyes turning to the front of the church. Mei Lin found herself standing there beside Pastor Matthews, with Jack and Mrs. Abernathy flanking her, and feeling completely out of her depth. We all know why we're here, Matthews began. Yesterday we did something extraordinary. We stood up to Victor Kane, we took back our town, our valley. Now we need to decide what comes next. We need a new sheriff, someone called out. And a new mayor, another voice added. We need to divide up Kane's land fair, said a ranch hand. Those of us who worked it deserve a share. Voices overlapped, everyone talking at once, the meeting threatening to descend into chaos. Mei Lin looked at Jack helplessly, and he shrugged, equally lost. Mrs. Abernathy stepped forward, and the force of her presence alone quieted the room. One thing at a time, she said firmly. First things first. We need to make sure Victor stays gone. That means posting guards, organizing patrols, being ready in case he comes back with hired guns or the army or whatever he can scrape together. Murmurs of agreement. Second, we need to establish legitimate authority. That means elections, real ones. For sheriff, for mayor, for a town council. Do this proper so nobody can claim we're just vigilantes. More agreement, though some faces showed confusion about how to actually do that. Third, Mrs. Abernathy continued, we need to handle the land situation. Victor's ranch, his holdings, they need to be redistributed, but legally, through proper channels. That means getting lawyers involved, judges, making sure everything's documented and recognized. That'll take months, Old Pete objected, maybe years. What do we do in the meantime? We do what we've been doing, work the land, take care of each other, build something worth defending. Mrs. Abernathy looked at Mei Lin. And we follow the example of the woman who showed us it was possible to stand up. All eyes turned to Mei Lin. She felt her face heat. I didn't mean to be an example. I was just fighting for what was mine. That's exactly why you're an example, Pastor Matthews said gently. You fought for what was yours even when everyone told you it was impossible. Even when you were alone. That's what we need to remember, what we need to be. A woman Mei Lin didn't recognize stood up. I think we should elect her sheriff. The room erupted, half the people shouting agreement, the other half shouting objections. Mei Lin's stomach dropped. No, she said, but her voice was lost in the chaos. Jack whistled sharply, the sound cutting through the noise. She said no. Listen to her. The crowd quieted and Mei Lin forced herself to speak clearly. I can't be sheriff. I'm Chinese, a woman. Half this town still thinks I'm barely human. Even if I wanted the job, which I don't, nobody would respect the authority. Things are different now, someone argued. Not that different, not yet. Mei Lin looked around the room. What happened yesterday was necessary, but if we're going to build something that lasts, it can't be built on one person. It has to be built on all of us. Together. That means choosing leaders who can actually lead, who know the law, know the land, know how to work within the system, even while we're changing it. Then who? Old Pete asked. Jack stepped forward. I'll do it, temporarily, until we can hold proper elections. The room went quiet. People looked at each other uncertainly. You're a stranger, someone pointed out. We don't even know you. That's true. But I know the law, served as a deputy marshal for 2 years after the war. I know how to keep order, and I don't have any stake in the old power structure. That makes me neutral enough to be fair. He fought with us, Tommy spoke up. Stood with Mei Lin when nobody else would. That counts for something. It counts for everything, Mrs. Abernathy agreed. I support Jack Callahan for interim sheriff. All in favor? Hands went up. Not all of them, but enough. More than half. Opposed? Fewer hands. Motion carries, Mrs. Abernathy declared. Jack Callahan is interim sheriff until we hold elections in, let's say, 3 months. That gives us time to establish order and figure out proper procedures. Jack looked surprised, like he'd suggested it on impulse and hadn't expected people to agree, but he nodded and accepted the responsibility. The meeting continued for another hour, hammering out details. Patrols would be organized in shifts, with volunteers rotating guard duty. A committee would be formed to inventory Victor's property and start the legal process of redistribution. Pastor Matthews would reach out to lawyers in the county seat to get guidance on proper procedures. Through it all, Mei Lin sat and listened, contributing when asked, but mostly just absorbing. These people, her neighbors, who'd ignored her suffering for 3 years, were now looking to her for guidance. The irony was bitter, but also strangely satisfying. When the meeting finally ended, people lingered to talk, to make plans, to argue details. Mei Lin slipped outside, needing air and space. She found herself walking toward the edge of town, toward the north road that led to her land. Jack caught up with her halfway there. "Where are you headed?" "Home, or where home used to be." "Want company?" She nodded, and they walked together in silence, leaving the bustle of town behind. The morning was clear and cool, the sky that impossible blue that California did better than anywhere else. Birds sang in the scrub brush. Somewhere a coyote howled. When they reached the ruins of her cabin, Mei Lin stopped and stared. In daylight, the destruction looked even worse. Just a black scar on the land, still smoking faintly, nothing left but ash and memories. "I'm sorry," Jack said again, "for the cabin, for everything you lost." "Don't be. It was just wood and nails. Thomas is still in the ground there." She pointed to a spot under the trees where a simple wooden cross marked his grave. "That's what matters. The land. The promise we made to each other." She walked to the grave and knelt, ignoring the protest from her ribs. Brushed away leaves that had fallen on the marker. "I did it, Thomas," she said quietly. "I kept the land. I stood up. I didn't run." Tears pricked her eyes. "I wish you could have seen it. Seen the town finally stand together. You always believed they would, eventually. I never did. But you were right." Jack stayed back, giving her space. She appreciated that about him. He seemed to know when to speak and when silence was better. She stayed at the grave for a long time, talking to Thomas in her head, telling him everything that had happened. When she finally stood, her knees were muddy and her face was wet, but she felt lighter somehow. "I'm going to rebuild," she told Jack. "Right here. Same spot. Bigger this time, like Mrs. Abernathy said. Make it strong enough to last. We'll help. All of us. I know." She looked at the ruins, then at the land stretching out around them. 40 acres of stubborn earth that had cost so much and meant everything. "This is mine. Nobody can take it now. Even if they burn it down again, it's still mine. That knowledge, that's worth more than any cabin." They walked the property together, Mei Lin pointing out boundaries, talking about where she'd plant vegetables come spring, where the new cabin should sit. Planning for a future she'd barely dared imagine a week ago. "What about you?" she asked Jack as they sat by the creek, watching water tumble over stones. "You've got a whole valley that needs a sheriff now. That's a lot of responsibility for a man who was just passing through." "I don't know. Haven't really thought about it." "Liar. You've thought about nothing else since they made you say yes." Jack smiled faintly. "All right, yeah, I've thought about it, and I'm terrified." "Why?" "Because I've spent 10 years running from responsibility, from commitment, from anything that required me to stay in one place and actually care about outcomes. And now," he gestured vaguely, "now I've got a whole town looking to me for leadership. What if I fail them? What if I'm not good enough?" "What if you are? That's scarier somehow." Mei Lin understood that. Success meant hope, and hope meant vulnerability. Easier to fail and confirm your worst beliefs about yourself than to succeed and have to rebuild those beliefs from scratch. "You stood with me when you could have walked away," she said. "That takes courage, character. Whatever else you think you're lacking, you've got those. And if Victor comes back, if I have to make decisions that get people killed, then you make them, and you live with them, same as any leader." She looked at him. "You can't run forever, Jack. Eventually you have to stop and build something. Might as well be here. Might as well be with people who already trust you." He was quiet for a long time, staring at the water. Finally he said, "When I saw you in that street, bleeding but not breaking, I saw someone who'd already made the choice I was too afraid to make. To stop running. To stand for something even if it cost everything. I thought if I stood with you, maybe some of that courage would rub off." "And did it?" "I don't know yet. Ask me in 3 months when elections come around and I have to decide if I'm staying or running again." They sat until the sun began to dip, painting the sky in shades of orange and gold. Then they walked back to town together, neither speaking but both comfortable in the silence. Over the next weeks, Redemption Springs transformed. Jack organized patrols with military precision, establishing routes and schedules that kept watch over the valley. Mrs. Abernathy convened daily meetings to coordinate efforts and address problems. Pastor Matthews made the trip to the county seat and returned with a lawyer, a young man named Harrison who was idealistic enough to take their case without much money up front. The legal situation is complicated, Harrison explained at a town meeting. Victor Kane still technically owns the land, but if we can prove abandonment and demonstrate community need, we might be able to force a sale through eminent domain. It'll take time and it'll take documentation. Lots of documentation. How much time? Someone asked. 6 months minimum, maybe a year. Groans of frustration rippled through the crowd. In the meantime, Harrison continued, you can continue working the land and operating businesses. Just keep detailed records, document everything. That'll help our case when we go before a judge. So they documented every bushel of wheat harvested, every calf born, every transaction at every business. The town became a hive of paperwork and planning, boring but necessary. Through it all, Maylene watched from the margins. She attended meetings when asked, but mostly focused on her own land. People from town came in shifts to help her rebuild. Tommy and his carpentry skills, ranch hands with strong backs, even Dr. Pritchard showing up one afternoon with a wagon full of lumber he'd purchased from his own pocket. Why? Maylene asked him, genuinely confused. Pritchard looked uncomfortable. Because I was wrong. About you. About a lot of things. And I'm trying to be better. It wasn't much of an apology, but it was something. Maylene accepted it and put him to work. The new cabin took shape slowly. Bigger than the old one, like Mrs. Abernathy had insisted. 2 rooms became 4. A real foundation instead of just posts in the ground. Windows with actual glass instead of oiled paper. It would be finished by winter, they estimated. Maybe. Jack came by most evenings after his patrol rounds, helping with the construction, sharing news from town. There was always news. Small dramas, minor conflicts, the everyday work of building a community. Sheriff Kane left, he reported one evening, about 3 weeks after the battle. Just packed up and rode out. Didn't even leave a note. And his deputies? Staying, but they're cooperating now. Figure they'd rather work with me than against the whole town. That's progress. Yeah. Jack hammered a nail with more force than necessary. Heard from old Pete that Victor's been seen in Sacramento, talking to lawyers, talking to politicians. Maylene's hand stilled on the board she was holding. He's coming back. Not yet. Maybe not ever. But he's planning something. Pete's sources think he's trying to build a case to reclaim his property, get the state involved. Can he do that? I don't know. Harrison says maybe. Depends on how good his lawyers are and how much influence he can buy. Jack set down his hammer. We need to be ready. Legal ready. Not just guns ready. We will be. They worked in silence for a while, the only sounds the hammer strikes and the evening birds. Maylene found the rhythm soothing, the simple act of building something with her own hands. This was how the world should work. Honest labor, visible results, community effort. I've been thinking, Jack said suddenly, about what you asked. Whether I'm staying. Maylene waited, not pushing. I'm staying, at least through the elections. Maybe longer. He looked at her. I want to see how this turns out. Want to be part of building something instead of just tearing things down. That sounds stupid? No, that sounds like exactly what this place needs. His smile was small but genuine. Yeah, maybe. As the sun set and they packed up tools for the night, Maylene looked at what they'd built. Walls rising from foundation, a roof beginning to take shape, something real and solid emerging from ash and determination. This was her land, her home. And now, finally, it felt like it might actually be safe. Not because some man had promised her security, not because the law had decided to protect her, but because she'd fought for it. And because people had finally decided to stand with her. That was worth every drop of blood, every moment of pain, every sleepless night. Worth everything. Winter came early to the valley that year, bringing frost that turned the scrubland silver and winds that howled through the gaps in unfinished walls. Maylene's new cabin stood mostly complete by the first snowfall. 4 rooms instead of 2, a stone fireplace instead of the old iron stove, windows that actually kept the cold out. It wasn't beautiful, but it was solid, built by dozens of hands and meant to last. She moved in on a gray December morning, carrying the few possessions she'd salvaged from the fire. Thomas's pocket watch. Her wedding ring. A photograph so charred around the edges you could barely make out his face. Not much to show for 6 years in America, but enough to remember by. Jack helped her arrange furniture, most of it donated by townspeople who'd found extra chairs in their attics, spare tables gathering dust in their barns. Mrs. Abernathy had contributed a bed frame and mattress, refusing payment with her usual gruffness. "Place looks good," Jack said, surveying the main room. "Solid. Should keep you warm through winter." "Should," Maylin agreed, testing the fireplace draft. It drew well. Tommy had insisted on building the chimney properly, said he wouldn't have his work falling apart come spring. "Thank you for all of this. I couldn't have—" "Don't," Jack interrupted gently. "You've thanked everyone a dozen times. We get it. You're grateful. Now let it be." She smiled despite herself. He was right. She'd been thanking people so much it was starting to sound empty, like words said out of obligation rather than feeling. Sometimes silence was more honest. They worked through the afternoon, getting the cabin livable. As evening approached and Jack prepared to head back to town, a rider appeared on the southern road, moving fast, urgent. Jack's hand went to his gun out of habit. But it was just Harrison, the young lawyer, his horse lathered from hard riding. He pulled up in front of the cabin, breathing hard. "We've got a problem," he announced without preamble. "Victor's filing suit. He's got a judge in Sacramento willing to hear his case. Claims we forcibly seized his property without legal authority. He's asking for the army to enforce the court's jurisdiction." Jack swore. Maylin felt her stomach drop. "When?" she asked. "Hearing's set for 2 weeks from now, January 5th. We need to be there, you especially. You're the center of this whole thing. If we don't show, the judge rules in Victor's favor by default." "And if we do show?" Jack asked. "Then we make our case. Prove abandonment. Prove Victor's history of violence and intimidation. Demonstrate community need. It's not guaranteed to work, but it's our only shot." Maylin looked at her new cabin, at the land she'd fought so hard to keep. 2 weeks until it could all be taken away by men in robes who'd never set foot in this valley, never seen what Victor Kane had done. "I'll go," she said. "Whatever it takes." Harrison nodded, relieved. "Good. We'll need testimony from others too, people willing to speak about Victor's abuses. Jack, as interim sheriff, your word carries weight. Mrs. Abernathy, Old Pete, anyone with credible stories." "You'll have them," Jack promised. After Harrison left to spread the word in town, Maylin and Jack sat by the newly built fireplace, watching flames dance over split logs. The warmth was welcome, but couldn't quite chase away the chill of fear. "We could lose everything," Maylin said quietly. "The judge could rule for Victor, send the army to enforce it. And then what? We fight federal troops? We can't win that." "No," Jack agreed. "We can't, but we're not there yet. Harrison's smart. He'll make a good case." "Against Victor's money, his lawyers, his connections?" "Against the truth. Sometimes that's enough." Maylin wanted to believe that. Wanted to believe truth mattered more than power. But she'd lived in this country long enough to know better. Truth was what rich men said it was. Justice was what they could afford. Still, what choice did they have but to try? The next 2 weeks passed in a blur of preparation. Harrison coached them on testimony. What to say? How to say it? What questions to expect? He gathered documents, statements, evidence of Victor's crimes, built a case from scraps and hope. The town rallied, contributing money for travel expenses, writing letters of support, organizing a delegation to attend the hearing. Even people who'd been neutral before took sides now, understanding that if Victor reclaimed his land through the courts, nothing they'd fought for would matter. On January 4th, a group of 15 left Redemption Springs for Sacramento. Maylin, Jack, Harrison, Mrs. Abernathy, Old Pete, and 10 others chosen for the strength of their stories. They traveled in wagons, the journey taking 2 days through cold that bit through every layer of clothing. Sacramento was bigger than Maylin remembered from her first arrival in California. Buildings crowded together, streets bustling with people who had somewhere important to be. She felt small here, insignificant. Just another immigrant woman in a city full of people who wouldn't see her if she stood right in front of them. They found lodging in a cheap hotel that smelled of tobacco and desperation. Harrison went over their testimony one final time that evening, his nervousness showing through the professional facade. Victor's lawyer is a man named Blackwood, he explained. He's good. Very good. He's going to try to paint you all as vigilantes, criminals who took the law into your own hands. We need to show you had no choice, that the established law failed you so completely that direct action was the only option. That's the truth, Mrs. Abernathy said. I know, but truth and what a judge accepts as truth aren't always the same thing. Harrison rubbed his eyes, looking young and overwhelmed. I'll do my best. I promise you that. They settled in for a restless night. Mei Lin shared a room with Mrs. Abernathy, the older woman snoring providing an odd comfort. At least someone could sleep. Morning came too soon. They dressed in their best clothes, which for Mei Lin meant a simple dress Mrs. Abernathy had loaned her, dark blue and severe. She braided her hair back tight, trying to look respectable, trying to look like someone a judge might listen to. The courthouse was an imposing building of stone and authority, columns rising toward a gray sky. People streamed in and out, lawyers with leather cases, clerks carrying armfuls of papers, petitioners seeking justice, or at least the appearance of it. Inside, the courtroom was all dark wood and high ceilings designed to make people feel small. Victor Kane sat at one table with his lawyer Blackwood, a silver-haired man in an expensive suit who radiated competent menace. Victor looked thinner than Mei Lin remembered, his face tight with barely controlled rage. Their eyes met across the courtroom, and something passed between them. Recognition, hatred, the knowledge that one of them was walking out of here victorious and the other destroyed. The judge entered, an elderly man named Morrison with white whiskers and the bearing of someone who'd spent 40 years deciding other people's fates. Everyone stood until he settled into his chair with a grunt. We're here regarding Kane versus the citizens of Redemption Springs, he announced, reading from papers before him. This is a property dispute with unusual circumstances. Mr. Blackwood, you're representing the plaintiff? I am, Your Honor. Blackwood stood, commanding the room with practiced ease. My client, Mr. Victor Kane, is a respected landowner who has been forcibly exiled from property he legally owns. A mob of vigilantes, led by this woman, he pointed at Mei Lin, assaulted his employees, threatened his life, and drove him from his home without due process or legal authority. We're seeking an order requiring these people to vacate Mr. Kane's property immediately in compensation for damages. Mr. Harrison, you're representing the defendants? Harrison stood, looking young and nervous next to Blackwood's silver polish. I am, Your Honor. We'll demonstrate that Mr. Kane abandoned his property after years of violent intimidation, that the community acted in self-defense, and that allowing him to return would endanger innocent lives. Judge Morrison made notes with a scratching pen. Very well, Mr. Blackwood, call your first witness. Victor took the stand, swearing an oath on a Bible that seemed to burn his hand. Under Blackwood's gentle questioning, he painted himself as a victim, a hard-working rancher driven from his land by foreigners and criminals. He spoke of his family's legacy, of building the valley from nothing, of the injustice of losing it all to a mob. And this woman, Blackwood said, gesturing at Mei Lin. Had you ever threatened her? Never. I offered to buy her land fair and square, generous price too. She refused and then led an armed rebellion against me. Did you send men to assault her? Absolutely not. I sent employees to make another offer. If they got rough, it was without my knowledge or approval. I run a large operation, can't control every action of every man. Lies, all of it, but delivered with such sincerity that Mei Lin saw the judge nodding along. This was how power worked. Rich men lied and the world believed them because the alternative was too uncomfortable. Harrison cross-examined, trying to poke holes in Victor's story, but Victor was slippery. Every accusation met with denial or misdirection. He'd been preparing for this, probably for months. When Victor finally stepped down, looking smug, Mei Lin felt hope slipping away. Blackwood called more witnesses, former employees who testified that Victor had been a fair boss, townspeople who'd benefited from his patronage, even a minister who spoke of Victor's generous donations to the church. A parade of lies and half-truths designed to rehabilitate a monster. Then it was Harrison's turn. He called old Pete first, who testified about his son's murder, described in painful detail how Victor had shot an unarmed man and the sheriff had called it self-defense. "And why didn't you seek legal recourse?" Blackwood asked on cross-examination. "Because the sheriff was Victor's cousin," Pete said flatly. "The judge was in Victor's pocket. There was no legal recourse, just survival." Mrs. Abernathy went next, her testimony precise and damning. She cataloged years of abuse, businesses destroyed for not selling to Victor, families driven out, women harassed. All of it overlooked by authorities who benefited from Victor's power. Jack testified about the beating he'd witnessed, about Victor's men attacking Mei Lin in broad daylight while the town watched, about the impossibility of getting justice through official channels. One by one, they told their stories. Paint a picture of a valley ruled by fear and a system designed to protect the powerful at the expense of everyone else. Finally, Harrison called Mei Lin. She walked to the stand on shaking legs, aware of every eye in the courtroom, swore her oath, and sat, gripping the wooden rail to keep her hands from trembling. Harrison started gently, asking about her background, how she'd come to America, married Thomas, tried to build a life. Then he got to the hard parts. "Tell the court about your interactions with Mr. Kane." Mei Lin took a breath and began. She described the harassment, the poisoned well, the destroyed crops, the constant threats, the day Victor's men beat her in the street, the ransacking of her home, the fire that destroyed everything. "And during all this," Harrison asked, "did you seek help from the law?" "Many times. The sheriff laughed at me, said I should sell and leave, that I didn't belong here." "Why didn't you leave?" "Because that land is mine. My husband died working it. It's all I have of the life we tried to build. I won't give it up to a man who thinks he can take whatever he wants just because he's powerful." Blackwood rose for cross-examination, his smile sharp as a knife. "Mrs. Lin, you admitted you led an armed group that assaulted my client. That's vigilante justice, is it not?" "It's self-defense." "You could have left, moved elsewhere, avoided confrontation." "I could have," Mei Lin agreed. "But why should I be the one to leave? He was the one committing crimes. He was the one who should face consequences." "But you took the law into your own hands." "No, I took my life into my own hands. There's a difference." Blackwood pressed, trying to shake her, but Mei Lin had spent 3 years being interrogated by hostile eyes. She'd learned to stand firm. When she finally stepped down, she couldn't read the judge's expression. He sat impassive, making notes, giving nothing away. Both sides gave closing arguments. Blackwood painted the defendants as dangerous criminals who threatened the very foundation of property rights. Harrison argued for justice beyond law, for the right of communities to protect themselves when institutions failed them. Judge Morrison listened to it all, then announced he'd deliver his verdict after a brief recess. The wait was agony. They gathered in the courthouse hallway, speaking in low voices, trying to read meaning into every glance from court officers passing by. "You did well," Jack told Mei Lin. "You were strong up there." "Strong enough?" "I don't know, but you told the truth. That's all you can do." After what felt like hours but was probably 30 minutes, they were called back in. Judge Morrison sat with papers before him, his expression grave. "I've considered the testimony and evidence presented. This is an unusual case, property rights versus community safety, legal procedure versus practical justice. Both sides have made compelling arguments." Mei Lin's heart hammered so hard she thought it might burst through her ribs. "However," the judge continued, "I cannot ignore the pattern of behavior demonstrated by Mr. Kane. Multiple witnesses, credible and independent, testified to years of intimidation and violence. The failure of local law enforcement to address these issues is troubling and suggests corruption that undermines the legitimacy of Mr. Kane's claims." Victor leaned forward, his face reddening. Furthermore, the evidence shows Mr. Kane abandoned his property after the confrontation. He made no attempt to legally contest the community's actions for 3 months. That suggests to me he recognized his position was untenable. Judge Morrison looked directly at Mei Lin. "That said, Mrs. Lin, what you and your community did was legally questionable. Taking the law into your own hands sets a dangerous precedent. However, I'm persuaded that you acted out of necessity when all legitimate channels had failed you." He paused, letting the tension build. "Therefore, I'm ruling that Mr. Kane's property rights are forfeit due to abandonment and documented criminal behavior. The land will be transferred to a community trust, to be administered by elected representatives and distributed according to fair principles determined by the community. The courtroom erupted. Victor surged to his feet, shouting. Blackwood tried to object. Harrison looked stunned, like he couldn't believe they'd won. Maylin just sat, letting the words wash over her. They'd won. Actually won. The judge banged his gavel, restoring order. Mr. Kane, you're barred from returning to the valley. Violation of this order will result in immediate arrest. This court is adjourned. Victor stormed out, Blackwood trailing behind, already talking about appeals. But Maylin could see in their faces that it was over. Appeals would go nowhere without new evidence, and the judge's ruling was thorough enough to withstand scrutiny. Outside the courthouse, their group gathered in a tight circle, still processing. Mrs. Abernathy wiped her eyes, the first time Maylin had seen her show real emotion. We did it, old Pete breathed. We actually did it. Harrison did it, Jack said, clapping the young lawyer on the shoulder. You made the case sing. Harrison shook his head. They made the case. I just presented it. The truth was enough for once. They celebrated that night at a restaurant nicer than any of them could really afford, splitting the cost and not caring about the expense. Tomorrow they'd start the long journey home. Tomorrow they'd begin the hard work of actually distributing land, establishing new governance, building the valley they'd fought for. But tonight they just celebrated being alive, being victorious, being together. Maylin found herself sitting next to Jack as the evening wore on, both of them quieter than the others. He'd had several drinks and his usual guardedness had softened. You think it'll stick? He asked. The judge's ruling? I don't know, maybe. We'll make it stick. Yeah, he smiled. We will. Are you staying after the elections? Jack was quiet for a long moment. 3 months ago, if you'd asked me that, I'd have said no. I'd have been planning my exit already. But now, he looked at her. Now I can't imagine leaving. This is the first place in 10 years that's felt like home. Or could be home if I let it. Then let it. That simple? It can be. If you stop making it complicated. He laughed. You make it sound easy. It's not easy. Nothing worth doing is. But it's possible. That's more than most people get. The journey back to Redemption Springs took 3 days, longer than the trip out because they stopped in towns along the way to share the news. Word spread fast. By the time they rolled into the valley, it seemed like half the territory knew about the judge's ruling. The town turned out to meet them, cheering and celebrating. Someone had made a banner that read, Home of the Free in crooked letters. It was corny and earnest and perfect. Over the following months, they made good on the judge's order, formed a real town council with elected representatives, divided Victor's land among those who'd worked it, with shares going to families based on need and contribution. Held elections for sheriff. Jack won in a landslide, though he grumbled about having to keep the job permanently. There were problems, of course, disputes over land boundaries, arguments about who deserved what. The messy work of democracy, when people who'd never had power suddenly found themselves holding it. But they worked through it, together. Because that's what community meant, not perfection, but commitment. The promise to keep showing up even when it was hard. Maylene's cabin became a gathering place for the newly formed council. They'd meet around her kitchen table, arguing and planning and slowly shaping the valley into something better than what it had been. She never sought leadership officially, but people looked to her anyway. The woman who'd stood when everyone else sat, who'd shown them it was possible to fight back. Spring came, and with it new growth. Wildflowers covered the valley in carpets of color, just like Thomas had loved. Maylin planted a garden, vegetables and herbs, nothing fancy, spent her days working the land that was finally, legally, undeniably hers. Jack came by most evenings after his sheriff rounds. Sometimes they talked, sometimes they just sat in comfortable silence, watching the sunset paint the sky. One evening in late April, almost a year after the day he'd stepped between her and Victor's men, he said, I've been thinking. Dangerous habit, he smiled. Yeah, but I've been thinking about the future, about what comes next. What does come next? I don't know. That's the thing I'm still figuring out. He looked at her. But I know I want to figure it out here, with you, if you'd want that. Maylin understood what he was asking without him saying it directly. Understood and felt something warm unfurl in her chest. She'd loved Thomas, would always carry him with her, but Thomas was gone and Jack was here, and there was something to be said for choosing life over memory. "I'd want that," she said simply. His smile was like sunrise. "Good, that's good." They didn't rush into anything, took it slow, letting something fragile become strong over time. Got married the following winter in a simple ceremony at the church, with Mrs. Abernathy officiating because Pastor Matthews insisted she'd earned the right. The valley prospered, not without setbacks. Crops failed sometimes, people argued. Life remained hard. But it was their hardship now, their struggle, their triumph. They owned it in a way they never had before. Maylin stood on her porch on a summer evening 5 years after the battle, watching Jack play with their daughter. A fierce little thing they'd named Hope because irony deserved acknowledgement. The cabin had grown again, additions sprawling to accommodate a growing family. The land produced well, supported them and others. She thought about Thomas sometimes, about the dreams he'd had that had brought her here. He'd been wrong about so much. America wasn't naturally just. Equality wasn't guaranteed. People weren't automatically good. But he'd been right about one thing. It was possible to build something better. Not easy, not guaranteed, but possible if enough people decided to try. The valley stretched out before her, worked by people who owned their own land, governed by representatives they'd chosen, protected by laws they'd helped write. It wasn't perfect. Nothing human ever was. But it was theirs. Mrs. Abernathy had died the previous winter, peacefully in her sleep at 78. She'd left the boarding house to the town with instructions that it be used to help newcomers get established. Her last act of defiance against the way things had always been. Old Pete still ran the livery, training his grandson Tommy to take over eventually. He'd finally stopped drinking, said he didn't need it anymore now that he had purpose beyond grief. The valley had become what they'd fought to make it. Not paradise, but a place where effort mattered more than heritage, where community stood stronger than individual power, where one woman's stubborn refusal to surrender could change everything. Maylin touched the scar above her eyebrow, faded now but still visible. A reminder of the price paid, of the fight won, of the truth that freedom wasn't given, wasn't guaranteed, wasn't inherited. It was taken, earned, defended with blood and will, and the simple refusal to accept that suffering was inevitable. Jack called to her from the yard, and she went to join her family, leaving behind the porch and the memories and the ghosts that would always linger. The past was done. The future was uncertain, but the present was hers. Hard-won and precious and entirely, completely hers. And that was enough. That was everything.